There is a moment before every transformation that no one witnesses. It is not marked by action, nor by decision as the world understands it. It does not arrive with clarity or certainty. It comes quietly, almost unnoticed. A subtle turning inward, a soft withdrawal from the need to be seen. This is where all true abundance begins. You may have believed that change requires visible effort, that wealth must be pursued through movement, that manifestation is something declared into existence through repetition and sound. Yet beneath all of these ideas lies a deeper principle, one that has remained untouched by time. What is formed in silence cannot be undone by noise. In the earliest traditions, there were those who understood this law without needing to name it. They did not gather to speak of their intentions. They did not reveal their visions to the uncertain minds of others. Instead, they cultivated a private world within, a sanctuary where their desires could take shape without interference. Imagine a craftsman working alone before dawn. No one sees the first lines he draws. No one hears the quiet adjustments of his hand. In the dim light, he refines, corrects, begins again. There is no audience to impress, no judgment to avoid. Only the work itself, unfolding in sacred solitude. By the time the world awakens, the foundation...
This is the hidden beginning. You are invited now to return to this way of creation, not through force, but through deliberate quiet. There is a practice, simple yet profound, that marks your entry into this path. It requires nothing external, no tools, no words, no movement that others might observe, only your attention. Each day, before the world has fully reached you, or after it has released its hold, find a moment where you can be entirely unseen. Sit or stand in a place where you will not be interrupted. Let your body be still, but not rigid. Let your breath move naturally, like a tide that asks for nothing. Then, without speaking, without forming words, allow a single vision to rise within you. Not a detailed plan, not a sequence of steps, only the essence of what you seek to experience. Wealth, if that is your path, but not as numbers or objects. Feel it instead as expansion, as ease, as a quiet certainty that nothing is lacking. Hold this not as something distant, but as something already present. Do not describe it. Do not explain it. Simply remain with it, as one might sit beside a fire without needing to understand its flame. At first, the mind may resist. It may attempt to name, to analyze, to pull the experience into language. Let this pass, as clouds pass across a still sky. Return again to the feeling, to the silent knowing beneath thought. Remain here for a few minutes, no longer than feels natural.
Then, just as gently as you entered, release it. Do not carry it into conversation. Do not share it, even with those you trust. The moment it is spoken, it begins to lose its original shape, becoming influenced by interpretation, by doubt, by the unseen projections of others. This is why silence is not merely absence. It is protection. There is a story told in fragments among ancient circles of a garden that could not be seen. It was said that those who spoke of their seeds before planting them found only barren soil. But those who worked quietly, who tended their ground in secrecy, who allowed time and stillness to do their work, these were the ones who returned to find their gardens already in bloom. No one knew how it happened. But those who experienced it did not question. They simply continued in silence. You are now standing at the edge of your own hidden garden. There is nothing you must prove here, nothing you must announce.
The power you seek does not respond to exposure. It responds to consistency within stillness. Let this be your beginning, not a declaration, but a quiet commitment. Not a visible change, but an invisible alignment. Each day you return to this practice, you strengthen a connection that cannot be measured by the outside world. And slowly, without urgency, without strain, something within you begins to reorganize. Thoughts become less scattered. Desires become more refined. Your presence begins to carry a subtle weight, not heavy, but grounded, as though you are no longer reaching outward, but allowing things to come toward you. This is the first movement of silent abundance. It does not announce itself. It simply begins. And once it has begun, it cannot be reversed.
There exists a mirror that reveals nothing to the eye, yet transforms everything within the one who gazes into it. It is not made of glass, nor framed by hand. It does not reflect your face, your form, or the image you have come to recognize as yourself. This mirror is older than appearance. It is the silent surface of your inner awareness, the place where identity is not seen, but chosen. Most pass their lives looking outward, measuring themselves by reflections offered through the world. They search for confirmation in the reactions of others, adjusting their posture, their voice, their desires to match what is returned to them. In doing so, they unknowingly surrender the authority of creation. For what is reflected externally is always delayed, always shaped by what has already been accepted within. The ancient practitioners understood this distortion. They turned away from visible mirrors and entered the unseen one. There, they practiced a discipline that required no audience, no validation, no proof. They became in silence what they wished to experience. This is the mirror without reflection. To approach it, you must first release the habit of looking for yourself in the world, not by rejecting what you see, but by no longer relying on it as a source of truth. The outer world is an echo, not a beginning. Your work begins elsewhere. There is a quiet exercise, subtle in form yet profound in effect, that allows you to enter this mirror. Choose a moment when you are alone and undisturbed. It need not be long, only uninterrupted. Sit or stand as you feel called, and allow your body to settle into stillness. Let your breath soften until it no longer demands your attention. Then, gently withdraw from all images of yourself that you have carried. Release the name you answer to. Release the roles you perform. Release the history you remember. For a few moments, let yourself exist without definition. At first, this may feel unfamiliar, even empty. The mind may reach for something to hold, a description, a memory, a shape. Allow these to pass without engagement. You are not removing yourself. You are uncovering what remains when all temporary identities fall away. In this quiet openness, begin to introduce a new presence. Not through imagination as fantasy, but through assumption as truth. Ask yourself, without words, who am I when I am already aligned with abundance? Do not answer with language. Instead, feel into the state. There is a difference between thinking of wealth and being the one who no longer questions its presence. The former is distant.
The latter is immediate, calm, unquestioned. Let this version of you emerge, not as something you are trying to become, but as something you are allowing to be recognized. Notice the shift. There is no urgency here, no grasping, no need to convince. This presence does not seek confirmation because it is already complete within itself. Remain with this state, quietly, without analysis. If thoughts arise that contradict it, do not resist them. Simply do not follow them. Return again and again to the felt sense of already being. This is the practice of the inner mirror. Over time, something begins to change, not in what you see externally at first, but in how you move within yourself. You become less reactive, less dependent on outcomes, less influenced by the shifting perceptions of others. You begin to carry a quiet certainty. There is an old parable of a traveler who carried a polished stone in his pocket. Whenever he felt uncertain, he would take it out and look into its surface. Yet no image appeared, only a depth that seemed to draw him inward. Others who saw the stone dismissed it, for it showed nothing. But the traveler grew steadily more composed, more assured, more at ease in all circumstances. When asked the reason for his calm, he simply said, "I no longer search for myself where I cannot be found." The stone was never the source. It was only a reminder. You do not need such an object, for the mirror you seek is already within you. It is available at all times, untouched by circumstance, unchanged by opinion. Yet it asks for one thing in return: silence. For the moment you attempt to explain who you are, you return to the outer mirrors. The moment you seek acknowledgement, you place your identity back into the hands of reflection. This is why your practice must remain unseen, not hidden out of fear, but protected out of understanding. There is a refinement that occurs only in privacy, a strengthening that happens when no one is observing, when no feedback is given, when no adjustment is made for the sake of appearance. In this solitude, your assumed identity deepens. It becomes less of an exercise and more of a natural state. You begin to notice subtle shifts in your daily life. Not dramatic changes, not sudden arrivals, but quiet realignments. Situations that once unsettled you lose their hold. Opportunities begin to appear without effort. Conversations unfold with an ease that was not present before. Yet you do not speak of these things. You observe them, acknowledge them inwardly, and return to your silence. For the outer world is beginning to reflect what you have established within, but it is still forming, still stabilizing. To expose it too early is to invite distortion. So you continue. Each day, you enter the mirror without reflection. Each day, you release what you have been told you are. Each day, you assume, without declaration, the presence of one who already holds what you seek. And slowly, as quietly as a shadow shifting at dusk, the world begins to respond. The world begins to respond, not to your words, not to your efforts, but to your being. This is the second principle of silent abundance. You do not become by showing. You become by knowing, in silence, until there is nothing left to prove. There is a form of giving that leaves no trace, no hand extended, no name remembered, no acknowledgement received. It passes through the world like a quiet current beneath still water, unseen
unrecorded, yet deeply transformative. This is the unseen exchange. In the outer world, giving is often bound to recognition. Acts are measured, counted, displayed. Generosity becomes a visible gesture, something to be noticed, something to be returned. Yet within this cycle, a subtle distortion arises. The act is no longer pure. It becomes entangled with expectation, with identity, with the quiet desire to be known as the one who gives. But the ancient keepers of silent abundance practiced differently. They gave where no one could see. They allowed their offerings to dissolve into the fabric of life without leaving a signature. In doing so, they aligned themselves with a deeper current, one that multiplies without interference, one that circulates beyond the limits of human acknowledgement. For what is given in silence is received without resistance. To understand this, you must look beyond the visible exchange of objects and enter the realm of energy, where all things are in constant movement. Every thought, every feeling, every intention carries a subtle imprint. It moves outward, interacts, and returns, not always in the form it left, but always in accordance with its origin.
When giving is done in silence, free from the need to be seen, its movement remains uninterrupted. It is not slowed by expectation. It is not redirected by the opinions of others. It flows directly into the unseen field, where it is received, expanded, and returned in ways that cannot be predicted, only experienced. This is the law beneath the act. There is a practice that allows you to enter this current, not through effort, but through quiet intention. Each day, choose a moment where you will give, yet let the giving remain invisible. It may be something tangible, placed where it will be found but never traced. It may be a quiet assistance offered without revealing your role. Or it may be something even more subtle, a silent blessing directed toward another, a wish for their well-being, their peace, their prosperity, sent without their knowledge, without your expectation of acknowledgement. What matters is not the form, but the secrecy. As you prepare to give, pause for a moment. Withdraw your attention from the outer act and turn inward. Feel the intention behind what you are about to offer. Let it be free of need. Let it be complete in itself, requiring nothing in return. Then act. Quietly, naturally, without emphasis. Once the act is done, release it entirely. Do not revisit it in thought. Do not hold it as something that defines you. Let it dissolve, as though it never belonged to you at all. At first, the mind may resist this. It may seek to recall, to measure, to quietly take ownership of what has been given. This is the old pattern, the desire to be recognized, even if only by yourself. Let this pass. Return to silence. There is a story told among those who walked this path of a man who lived in a village where scarcity was common. Each night, without being seen, he would leave small offerings at the doors of others. Food, coins, simple necessities. He never spoke of it. He never allowed himself to be discovered. Years passed, and the village slowly transformed. Where there had been lack, there was now quiet stability. Where there had been worry, there was ease. The man himself appeared unchanged. He did not display wealth. He did not seek position. Yet those who looked closely noticed something different. There was a steadiness about him, a calm presence that seemed untouched by circumstance. When asked how he had come to live this way, he offered no explanation, for he understood that what had returned to him was not a direct exchange, but a reflection of the current he had entered. He had given without interruption, and so he received without resistance. This is the nature of the unseen exchange. It is not a transaction. It is a circulation. As you begin this practice, you may not immediately see its effects in the outer world. This is not because nothing is happening, but because the movement is taking place beyond the visible layer of experience. Trust this. Each silent act of giving strengthens your alignment with abundance, not by accumulating, but by affirming in the deepest part of your being that there is always enough to offer. This knowing reshapes you. You begin to move through the world with a quiet confidence, no longer guarded, no longer concerned with holding tightly to what you have. There is a natural openness, a sense that what flows outward is never lost, only transformed. And because you do not speak of it, because you do not display it, this state remains undisturbed. It deepens. There is no need to prove generosity, no need to demonstrate worthiness. The act itself, performed in silence, becomes its own completion. Over time, you may notice something subtle yet profound. Opportunities arise that feel unforced. Support appears from unexpected places. Resources gather without strain. It is not that the world is suddenly giving to you. It is that you have entered into harmony with a current that has always been flowing. You have removed the barriers that once interrupted it. This is why silence is essential. For the moment giving becomes known, it is pulled back into the realm of exchange and recognition. It becomes subject to interpretation, to expectation, to the countless influences that shape visible action. But what remains unseen remains pure, and what remains pure multiplies. Let this be your practice. Give and let it vanish. Offer and release. Move through your days with quiet acts that no one can trace. In doing so, you step beyond the ordinary patterns of accumulation and enter a deeper rhythm, one where abundance is not something you chase, but something you participate in. This is the third principle of silent abundance. What you give in secrecy returns in ways that cannot be predicted, only received. And because it is not bound to form, it arrives with a precision that speaks directly to your path. So continue, not loudly, not visibly, but with a quiet devotion that asks for nothing and transforms everything.
There is a place within you that cannot be reached in company. It is not hidden by distance, nor guarded by effort. It is simply veiled by presence, by the subtle awareness of being observed, by the quiet adjustments you make when another mind is near. Even in silence among others, a part of you remains outward-facing, attentive, shaped by the possibility of being seen. But true alignment with abundance requires a deeper stillness. It requires a return to solitude, not as isolation, not as absence, but as a sacred condition in which your inner world can unfold without influence.
This is the chamber of solitude. The ancient ones did not fear being alone. They sought it with intention, not to escape the world, but to step beyond its noise, its expectations, its constant reflections. In solitude, they entered a space where their thoughts were no longer echoes, where their desires were no longer shaped by comparison, where their presence could settle into its natural state. Here, creation became clear. You are invited now to rediscover this chamber, not as a place outside you, but as a rhythm you return to, daily, quietly, without announcement.
Begin by choosing a time that belongs only to you. It need not be long. Even a brief interval held consistently becomes a doorway. What matters is not duration, but purity. Time that is untouched by interruption, unclaimed by obligation, unshared. When you enter this time, do so deliberately. Let the outer world fall away, not by force, but by gentle withdrawal. Turn away from all forms of input, voices, screens, distractions. Allow yourself to exist without engagement. At first, you may feel a subtle discomfort. This is natural. The mind, accustomed to constant movement, may search for something to hold. It may attempt to fill the space with thought, to recreate the noise you have stepped away from. Do not resist this. Simply observe, without attachment, and remain. Gradually, something begins to shift. The surface activity of the mind softens. The need to react, to respond, to engage, fades. Beneath it, a quieter layer emerges. It does not speak in words. It does not demand attention. It simply is. This is the threshold of the chamber. To deepen your presence here, there is a practice, simple yet transformative. As you sit in solitude, bring your awareness gently to the center of your being, not to a physical point, but to a felt sense of presence. You may experience it as a stillness behind your breath, a quiet space beneath your thoughts, a subtle awareness that observes without participating. Rest here. Do not try to control your experience. Do not seek a result. Allow yourself to settle, as water settles when left undisturbed. In this stillness, something begins to reveal itself. Not as a sudden insight, not as a dramatic realization, but as a quiet coherence. Your thoughts begin to align. Your desires become clearer, not louder, but more refined. What once felt scattered now gathers into a gentle focus. This is the natural order of your being, revealed only in solitude. There is a story of a woman who lived at the edge of a vast forest. Each day, she worked among others, tending to the needs of her community, speaking, listening, responding. Yet every evening, as the light began to fade, she would walk alone into the trees. No one followed her. No one asked why. There, in the quiet of the forest, she would sit without movement, without purpose. Hours would pass, though she did not measure them. When she returned, she carried nothing visible, no object, no message. And yet, over time, her life began to change. Where others struggled to decide, she moved with ease. Where others sought answers, she seemed already to know. Opportunities appeared before her, not through effort, but through alignment. Those around her noticed, but she offered no explanation. For what she had found could not be spoken. It could only be entered. This is the nature of the chamber of solitude. It does not give you something new. It reveals what has always been present, beneath the noise. As you continue this practice, you may begin to feel a quiet separation, not from the world itself, but from the urgency it carries. Situations that once demanded immediate reaction lose their hold. You find yourself observing more, responding less, moving with a calm that does not need to be justified. This is not detachment in the sense of withdrawal. It is alignment. You are no longer pulled by every current.
You are anchored in something deeper, something that does not shift with circumstance. From this place, your actions become more precise. You do less, yet what you do carries greater effect. You speak less, yet your words hold more weight. You reveal less, yet your presence becomes more felt. This is the quiet power of solitude. But it must be protected. The moment this practice becomes something you discuss, something you explain, something you seek to validate, it begins to lose its depth. For solitude, once observed, changes its nature.
It becomes performance, even if only in subtle ways. So you keep it to yourself, not as secrecy born of fear, but as preservation born of understanding. This is your chamber. No one else enters. No one else needs to know.
Each day you return, the space deepens. What was once unfamiliar becomes natural. What once required intention becomes a quiet habit. And from this chamber, your entire life begins to reorganize. Not through force, not through effort, but through the steady influence of a mind that has learned to rest in its own presence. This is the fourth principle of silent abundance. That what is cultivated in solitude carries a power that cannot be replicated in the presence of others. So return again and again, not to escape the world, but to meet it from a place that is no longer shaped by it.
There is a timing that cannot be measured by clocks. It does not follow the division of hours, nor the urgency of deadlines. It moves beneath the surface of events, guiding what unfolds with a precision that appears effortless to those who are aligned with it. This is the sacred rhythm of time. Most live in resistance to this rhythm. They rush when stillness is required. They wait when movement is called for. They measure progress by visible change, unaware that the most important transformations occur beyond the reach of observation. In this misalignment, effort becomes strain. But there are those who have learned to move differently. They do not force time to serve them. They listen. The ancient practitioners spoke of time not as a line, but as a field, alive, responsive, attuned to the inner state of the one who moves within it. They understood that each action carries a moment that belongs to it, and when that moment is honored, the action unfolds with a quiet ease. When it is ignored, resistance appears. You are invited now to enter this deeper relationship with time, not by controlling it, but by sensing its movement within you. There is a practice, subtle and precise, that reveals this rhythm. At the beginning of your day, before engaging with the world, enter a moment of stillness. Let your body be quiet, your breath unforced. Do not think of what must be done. Do not arrange your actions in sequence. Instead, listen inwardly. Beneath the surface of thought, there is a quiet inclination, a sense of direction that does not speak in words, but in feeling. It may draw you toward a certain task or away from another. It may suggest waiting, even when the mind insists on action. This is not hesitation. It is alignment. To follow it requires trust, and above all, silence. For the moment you begin to explain your timing to others, you return to the outer rhythm, the one shaped by expectation, by comparison, by the visible movements of those around you. The sacred rhythm does not reveal itself under scrutiny. It is felt, then followed. Begin with small movements. When you sense a quiet readiness to act, Do so without delay. Not hurried, not forced, but naturally, like a door that opens when gently pushed. When you sense a need to pause, honor it. Even if the outer world continues in motion, allow yourself to remain still. This stillness is not absence, it is preparation. Over time, you will begin to notice a difference. Actions taken in alignment require less effort. They encounter fewer obstacles. They unfold with a sense of inevitability, as though they were always meant to occur in that moment.
There is a story of an artisan who crafted intricate instruments, each one known for its precision and harmony. Those who observed him noticed something unusual. He did not work continuously. There were long periods where he sat without movement, his tools untouched. Many assumed he was delaying, wasting time. Yet when he began, his work flowed without interruption. Each movement was exact, each adjustment precise. What others struggled to achieve in days, he completed with quiet ease. When asked how he knew when to begin, he simply said, "I wait until the work is already finished within me." This is the essence of sacred timing. The action you take outwardly is only the final expression of a process that has already unfolded within. To act before this inner completion is to move against the current. To wait beyond it is to hesitate after the door has opened. Both create resistance. But to move in harmony with it, to act when the moment is whole, is to experience effort without strain. There is also a deeper layer to this rhythm, one that extends beyond daily actions. It is the timing of manifestation itself. You may have been taught to expect immediate results, to measure your progress by what appears quickly. Yet the law of silent abundance follows a different pattern. What is formed in silence grows according to its nature, not your impatience. Some seeds break the surface quickly. Others require time in the unseen, developing roots that will support a greater expansion. If you disturb them, if you dig them up to check their progress, you interrupt their growth. So too with your desires. Once you have entered the silent knowing, once you have felt the presence of what you seek, you must allow it to unfold without interference. Do not measure. Do not question. Do not attempt to accelerate what has its own rhythm. Your role is not to force the outcome. It is to remain aligned with its becoming. This is why silence is essential. For the moment you speak of your expectations, you introduce external timelines. You invite comparison, doubt, interpretation. You shift from inner knowing to outer validation, and the rhythm is lost. So you remain quiet. You act when it feels complete. You rest when it feels unfinished. You trust that what is forming does so with an intelligence beyond your control. And slowly, you begin to see the pattern. Things arrive not when you demand them, but when you are ready to receive them. Opportunities appear at moments that feel precise, almost orchestrated. Encounters occur that shift your path without effort. You begin to move through life not as one who chases time, but as one who walks within it. This is the fifth principle of silent abundance. That time, when honored in silence, becomes an ally rather than a force to overcome. So listen, not to the noise of urgency, but to the quiet rhythm beneath it. There is a timing within you that has never been wrong. Return to it and allow your life to unfold, not through pressure, but through alignment. There is a movement that leaves no footprint. No sound announces it. No eye observes it. Yet it alters the course of events more deeply than the most visible effort. It is the action taken before action, the quiet shift within that precedes all outward change. This is the invisible action. The world has taught you to equate movement with progress. To act is to do, to push, to engage, to make something happen. And yet, beneath every visible act lies a subtler origin, a decision made in silence, a state assumed without declaration, a direction chosen before any step is taken. Most ignore this origin. They move outwardly while remaining unchanged within, and so their actions carry conflict. Effort increases, results delay, and the path becomes heavy with resistance. But when the inner movement is complete, the outer action becomes simple. The ancient practitioners understood this distinction. They did not begin with doing. They began with being. They allowed the internal shift to occur fully, silently, until the external world had no choice but to follow. You are invited now to enter this deeper form of action, not by withdrawing from the world, but by transforming the place from which your actions arise. There is a practice, subtle, almost imperceptible, that reveals the power of invisible movement. At any moment during your day, when you feel the impulse to act, pause. Do not suppress the impulse. Do not rush to fulfill it. Simply hold it in awareness, as one might hold a delicate object without grasping it tightly. Then, turn inward. Ask yourself without words, from where does this action arise? Is it driven by urgency? By the need to prove, to fix, to control? Or does it emerge from a quieter place, a sense of readiness, of alignment, of natural flow? Do not analyze, simply feel. If the impulse carries tension, allow it to dissolve. Do not act from it. Return to stillness, even if only for a brief moment, until the tension softens. If the impulse remains, but now feels calm, unforced, complete, then it has shifted. This is the invisible action taking form. From here, when you move, your movement carries a different quality. It is not strained. It does not seek immediate results. It unfolds naturally, often with less effort than expected, yet with greater effect.
There is a story told of a builder who was known for raising structures that stood firm through time. Others labored intensely, reinforcing, adjusting, repairing. Their work required constant attention. But this builder worked differently. Before placing a single stone, he would stand quietly upon the ground. He would remain there, unmoving, for long periods. Those who watched did not understand. They saw no progress, no visible effort. Yet when he began, his movements were few and precise. The structure rose steadily, without error, without the need for correction. When asked his method, he replied, "I do not build until the foundation has accepted the structure." He was not speaking of the earth beneath him. He was speaking of the unseen alignment within. This is the essence of invisible action. The world sees only the final movement, but the true work has already been completed in silence. To practice this is to step out of reaction and into intention, not the kind that is spoken or declared, but the kind that is felt and embodied. Throughout your day, you will encounter moments that invite action, a decision to be made, a response to be given, a step to be taken. In each of these, you are offered a choice: to act from the surface, where movement is immediate but often misaligned, or to pause, even briefly, and allow the deeper alignment to form. At first, this may seem to slow you. You may feel as though you are doing less. But over time, you will notice something different. The actions you do take begin to carry more weight. They require less correction. They lead more directly to their natural outcome. You begin to trust your movement, not because it is frequent, but because it is aligned. There is also a deeper layer to this practice, one that extends beyond individual actions. It is the recognition that your very state of being is itself an action. To assume the presence of abundance, to feel its quiet certainty within you, is not passive. It is the most profound movement you can make. For from this state, all external actions are shaped. If you move outwardly while holding inward doubt, your actions carry that doubt. If you move outwardly while holding inward certainty, your actions carry that certainty. The world responds not to what you do, but to the state from which you do it. This is why the invisible action must come first. It sets the tone, the direction, the outcome, before anything is seen. And because it is unseen, it remains undisturbed. No one questions it. No one influences it. It is yours alone. So you begin to cultivate this quiet discipline. You pause before movement. You align before action. You allow the inner shift to complete itself before expressing it outwardly. And gradually, your life takes on a different rhythm. Less urgency, less correction, more clarity, more ease. You find that you are no longer reacting to circumstances, but participating in their formation, not through force, but through alignment. This is the sixth principle of silent abundance, that the most powerful actions are those that occur before anything is done. So move gently, act quietly, and remember that what you do in the unseen shapes everything that follows.
There is a force that disturbs what is still forming. It does not arrive as an obvious threat. It speaks softly, often through familiar voices, through casual questions, through the subtle curiosity of those who do not know what they interrupt. It appears as concern, as interest, as conversation. Yet beneath it lies a current that can unsettle what has not yet taken root. This is the disturbance of exposure. What is newly formed within you, your silent assumptions, your unseen alignments, your quiet becoming, is delicate in its early stages. Not weak, but sensitive. Like a flame just lit, it does not need to be protected from its own nature, but from the winds that surround it. The ancient practitioners understood this without needing to defend it. They did not speak of their inner work. They did not reveal the movements of their becoming. They carried a stillness that others could feel but not enter. This was their protection. You are invited now to cultivate this same veil.
Not as secrecy born of fear, but as preservation born of understanding. There is a difference between hiding and guarding. To hide is to feel that something may be taken. To guard is to know that something must not be disturbed. Your practice, your alignment, your silent relationship with abundance, these are not meant for discussion. Not because others would oppose them, but because they would interpret them. And interpretation alters energy. Even the most well-meaning response introduces a layer that was not originally present. A question can plant doubt. A comment can redirect focus. A simple acknowledgement can shift your awareness from being to appearing. And so, the unseen becomes seen. The silent becomes spoken. And the purity begins to change. This is why the veil must remain. There is a practice that strengthens this quiet protection. As you move through your day, notice the moments when you feel the impulse to speak of your inner work. It may arise subtly, the desire to share an insight, to mention a shift, to explain a change in your perspective. Pause. Do not suppress the impulse. Simply observe it. Ask yourself, without words, what seeks to be gained by speaking this? Is it connection, recognition, confirmation? These are natural inclinations, but they belong to the outer world. They are not part of the silent path. Let the impulse pass as a wave passes across still water. Return to your quiet knowing. There is a story told among those who walked this way of a keeper of rare seeds. He lived in a place where the soil was fertile, yet unpredictable. Many attempted to grow their gardens in the open, speaking proudly of what they had planted, inviting others to observe their progress. But their crops often failed.
Not because the seeds were flawed, but because the ground had been disturbed too often, the process interrupted by attention. The keeper worked differently. He planted in hidden places, away from sight. He spoke nothing of what he was cultivating. Even when asked, he would smile gently and change the subject. Seasons passed. Where others saw little growth, his land began to flourish. Plants emerged where no one expected them. Fruit appeared without announcement. His garden expanded, quietly, steadily, untouched by interference. When at last someone discovered his work and asked how he had achieved such abundance, he offered only a single sentence. What is unseen is allowed to complete itself. This is the essence of the veil. It does not block others from your life. It simply prevents them from entering the sacred space of your becoming. As you deepen in this practice, you may notice a shift in how you engage with the world. You listen more than you speak. You observe without needing to respond. You allow others to share freely while you remain anchored in your own quiet center. This is not withdrawal. It is refinement. Your presence becomes more contained, more grounded. You no longer feel the need to explain yourself, to justify your direction, to seek agreement. There is a calm within you that does not depend on being understood. And from this calm, your path becomes clearer. There will be moments when others question your silence. They may sense that something within you has changed, that you are no longer participating in the same patterns of expression. You need not answer. Silence itself is your response. Not as resistance, but as alignment. For what you are cultivating does not require explanation. It requires space. There is also a deeper aspect to this protection, one that extends beyond words. It is the protection of your attention. Where you place your awareness determines what influences you. To constantly engage with the thoughts, opinions, and energies of others is to allow your inner state to be shaped externally. This is a subtle exposure. So you become selective, not in a way that separates you from the world, but in a way that preserves your inner clarity. You choose what you take in. You choose where your attention rests. You choose when to engage and when to remain still. In doing so, you create a boundary that does not need to be seen to be effective. This is your veil. It is not something you put on. It is something you maintain. Through silence, through awareness, through the quiet understanding that what is forming within you is sacred and therefore not to be interrupted. As this veil strengthens, your inner work deepens without disruption. Your assumptions stabilize.
Your assumptions stabilize. Your alignment becomes steady. What once felt fragile now feels rooted, not because it has been tested, but because it has been allowed to grow undisturbed. This is the seventh principle of silent abundance, that what is protected in silence is preserved in its original purity. So guard gently, not with force, not with fear, but with quiet certainty. What you are becoming does not need to be seen to be real. And in remaining unseen, it becomes unshakable.
There is a threshold where seeking ends, not because desire disappears, but because the seeker dissolves into what is already known within. At this threshold, effort becomes unnecessary, and pursuit becomes stillness. What remains is not becoming, but being assumed as truth. This is the assumed identity of abundance. Most remain in a state of negotiation with their reality. They declare intentions, repeat affirmations, visualize outcomes. Yet beneath these practices, there is often a subtle distance between themselves and what they desire. A quiet sense that it is not yet true, not yet here, not yet them. And so the separation continues. For the universe does not respond to what is wished for. It responds to what is embodied. The ancient understanding was simple, though rarely spoken openly. You do not attract what you want. You experience what you are. To shift your reality, you do not chase the external form of wealth. You inhabit the internal state of the one who no longer questions its presence. This is not imagination as escape. It is assumption as identity. There is a practice that opens this doorway, not through effort, but through quiet recognition. Begin in solitude.
Not as ritual for display, but as private alignment. Sit without distraction. Let the outer world fade into irrelevance for this moment. No planning, no analysis, no revisiting of past or future. Only presence. Now, gently withdraw from the identity you have been wearing out of habit, not rejecting it, not judging it, but stepping back from it as one steps out of a garment that no longer defines them. Release for a moment the version of you that is striving, the one that is trying, the one that is waiting. And in that space, allow a quieter identity to emerge. Not constructed, recognized. This is the version of you who is no longer in pursuit of abundance, because abundance is no longer a question. There is no excitement in this state, no urgency, no emotional fluctuation. It is calm, grounded, complete. It does not seek confirmation because it is not uncertain. Simply rest here. Not imagining wealth as something arriving toward you, but as something already integrated into the fabric of your life. Not as possession, but as nature. Let the feeling be subtle, a quiet certainty, a softened inner
posture, as if something once questioned has now been resolved without effort. Do not force it. Do not intensify it. If it fades, gently return, not to the idea, but to the feeling of being the one for whom lack is no longer central. This is the essence of assumption. There is a story told of a wanderer who entered a distant city where he carried no wealth, no status, no claim. Yet he behaved as though he belonged there completely. Not in arrogance, but in quiet certainty. He asked no permission to exist. He moved as though every path was already open to him. At first, others did not notice him. But over time, doors that were once closed began to open. Conversations shifted. Opportunities appeared without pursuit. Nothing about his external circumstance had changed in appearance, but everything around him began to align with the state he consistently embodied. When asked how he achieved this, he said only, "I stopped asking reality to confirm me. I began living as though it already had." This is not deception. It is alignment with a deeper order. For what you assume consistently becomes the lens through which life organizes itself around you. If you assume lack, even subtly, even unconsciously, you will interpret the world through absence. If you assume sufficiency, completion, quiet abundance, you will begin to notice what has always been present, but previously overlooked. The external world does not shift first. Your recognition of it shifts first. And that recognition begins in silence. This is why this identity must not be spoken too soon. When shared prematurely, it becomes subject to comparison, interpretation, and doubt. It is pulled back into the realm of performance, where it loses its natural stability. So, it remains private. Not hidden from life, but protected from distortion. There will be moments when the old identity returns. Moments of uncertainty, of hesitation, of mental resistance. Do not argue with them. Do not reinforce them. Simply observe and gently return. Not to effort, not to correction, but to assumption. Each return strengthens the inner structure of this identity. Slowly, without force, it becomes less of a practice and more of your natural state. You begin to notice subtle changes in how you move through the world. You are less reactive to lack, less impressed by delay, less disturbed by appearance. There is a steadiness forming within you that does not depend on external validation. And from this steadiness, action becomes effortless. Not because life becomes easier.
Not because life becomes easier, but because you are no longer negotiating your place within it. This is the 8th principle of silent abundance. That identity, when assumed in silence, becomes the foundation upon which experience reorganizes itself. So step gently into this state, not as aspiration, but as recognition. You are not becoming this version of yourself. You are remembering it. And in that remembrance, everything begins to align without force.
There is a force within stillness that the restless mind cannot comprehend. It does not behave like effort. It does not follow the logic of addition. It is not built through accumulation or sustained exertion. Instead, it expands through absence, through the removal of interference, through the deepening of quiet, through the refinement of inner space. This is energetic multiplication. Most are taught to believe that more action produces more results. Yet in the subtle architecture of existence, action without alignment disperses energy, while stillness with intention concentrates it. What is scattered weakens. What is gathered multiplies. The ancient teachings spoke of this in symbols rather than instruction. They described reservoirs that filled without visible source, fires that burned without fuel, gardens that flourished without
constant tending. These were not miracles in the external sense. They were demonstrations of coherence, states in which energy was no longer leaking outward in fragmentation, but moving inward toward unity. You are invited now to understand stillness not as inactivity, but as containment of power. There is a practice that reveals this principle, not through theory, but through direct experience. Find a moment of solitude where nothing is required of you. Not productivity, not response, not observation of external input. Let yourself step away from the constant movement of engagement. Sit or stand in quiet presence.
Do not attempt to control your thoughts. Do not attempt to silence them. Simply allow them to pass without attachment, as though they belong to a distant field that no longer requires your participation. Now bring your attention inward, not toward a thought,
but toward the space in which thoughts appear. This is the subtle shift. You are not focusing on content. You are resting in the container. At first, this may feel empty. The mind may interpret this as lack. But what you are actually encountering is undivided potential. In this state, something begins to reorganize. Energy that was previously scattered across worry, anticipation, reaction, and interpretation begins to return inward. Not forcefully, but naturally, as though recognizing its original source. Remain here. Do not seek outcome. Do not construct meaning. Allow the stillness to deepen without interference. There is a point in this practice where a subtle density is felt. Not heaviness, but presence. A quiet fullness that does not arise from stimulation, but from coherence. This is the beginning of multiplication. It is not that more is being added. It is that less is being lost. There is a story of an old well in a forgotten village. Many believed it had dried, for no visible water could be seen at its surface. Travelers passed it without notice, assuming it had lost its purpose. But those who understood its nature knew otherwise. They would sit beside it in silence. They would not disturb it, not attempt to force anything from it. And in time, the well would begin to yield water. Not because it was made to produce more, but because its flow had been restored by stillness. What was blocked had been released. What was scattered had returned. Your inner energy functions in the same way. When constantly directed outward, through worry, excessive speech, over-explanation, reaction, it disperses. Not disappears, but fragments. And fragmented energy produces fragmented results. But when you return to stillness, even briefly, you restore coherence. And coherence multiplies impact. You may notice this in subtle ways at first. Less effort required to complete tasks. Clearer decisions without overthinking. A sense that timing aligns without forcing. These are not external changes alone. They are reflections of internal consolidation. It is important to understand that this practice does not demand withdrawal from life.
It demands precision in how you engage with it. You do not avoid action. You refine the state from which action arises. Even within activity, you can maintain a center of stillness,
A part of you remains untouched by urgency, observing without fragmentation, participating without dispersal. This is where multiplication becomes continuous, not in isolated moments of meditation, but in sustained inner coherence throughout movement. There will be times when the stillness is disturbed, not because it is weak, but because external demands attempt to pull awareness outward into fragmentation. In these moments, do not resist. Simply return. Even a brief return restores alignment. Like a thread reconnected, energy begins to gather again. Over time, something profound begins to shift. You find yourself needing less input to feel clear, less external validation to feel steady, less explanation to feel certain. The internal field becomes self-sustaining. And from this self-sustaining field, life begins to respond differently. Not dramatically, but precisely. Opportunities arise without strain. Solutions appear without forced reasoning. You act less, yet your actions carry more effect. This is the paradox of multiplication through stillness, that what is not scattered becomes exponentially more powerful. So you continue, not by adding more, but by removing what interrupts coherence. You speak less when unnecessary. You react less when unaligned. You return more often to the space beneath thought. And in that return, your inner world becomes a field of quiet expansion. This is the 9th principle of silent abundance. That stillness, when sustained without interruption, becomes a multiplying force that reorganizes all experience around it. So remain steady, not active in excess, not passive in absence, but centered in a stillness that gathers everything back into itself.
There is a wealth that cannot be spoken without dilution. It is not stored in objects, nor measured in numbers, nor exchanged through visible means. It moves through an entirely different economy, one governed not by transaction, but by resonance. This is the currency of sacred silence. The world teaches you to convert everything into expression, to speak in order to validate, to explain in order to confirm, to reveal in order to exist more fully. Yet in doing so, something subtle is often lost, the unbroken current of inner power that exists only when untouched by articulation. There are states within you that lose density the moment they are spoken. Not because speech is wrong, but because premature expression disperses what has not yet stabilized. The ancient ones understood this. They guarded certain insights, not out of secrecy for its own sake, but because they knew that silence preserves energetic integrity. What is held in silence matures. What is spoken too early fragments. This is why silence is not emptiness, it is containment. A vessel in which energy gathers, deepens, and refines itself before entering the outer world. You are invited now to recognize your silence, not as absence of communication, but as active preservation of power. There is a practice that reveals this directly. Throughout your day, observe the impulse to speak unnecessarily, not from obligation, but from reflex. The impulse to explain, to narrate, to share states that are still forming within you. Do not suppress this impulse, simply witness it. Then ask inwardly, does this expression preserve my inner state, or disperse it? This question is not intellectual. It is felt. If the expression feels like completion, allow it. If it feels like leakage, remain silent. Return the energy inward. There is a story of a silent observer in an ancient court. He was known not for speaking, but for listening so deeply that even rulers felt altered in his presence. Many tried to draw words from him, believing that wisdom must be spoken to be real. But he rarely answered. When he did, his words were few. And those words carried weight far beyond their sound. One day, a young seeker asked him, "Why do you hold so much in silence?" He replied, "Because what is still forming must not be scattered before it becomes whole." This is the essence of sacred silence. It is not withholding, it is cultivation. When you begin to treat your inner states as something valuable enough to protect, your entire relationship with expression changes. You no longer speak to release pressure. You speak only when expression adds coherence, clarity, or necessary direction. Everything else returns inward. At first, this may feel unfamiliar. The mind is conditioned to externalize experience quickly, to share, to confirm, to seek reflection. But as you practice restraint, not suppression, but refinement, you begin to notice something subtle. Your inner state strengthens. Thoughts become clearer. Emotions become less scattered. Your sense of direction becomes more stable. This is because energy that would have been dispersed through expression remains within the field, continuing to develop its form. Silence, then, becomes productive in a way speech cannot. It allows what is forming within you to reach completion without interruption. There is another layer to this principle. Silence does not only preserve your inner state, it amplifies its influence. What remains unspoken carries a different weight in the energetic field. It is not weakened by interpretation. It is not altered by reaction. It exists in its purest form and therefore radiates with greater coherence. This is why those who cultivate deep silence often carry a presence that is felt before they speak. Their stillness communicates more than words. Their restraint is not emptiness, it is density. As you continue this practice, you will begin to notice shifts in your external reality. Conversations become more intentional. Interactions become less draining. You find yourself no longer needing to explain your inner world in order to maintain it. There is a quiet sovereignty forming within you. Not isolation, not detachment, but clarity that no longer depends on external validation. It is important, however, to understand that sacred silence is not avoidance. It is discernment. You do not withdraw from communication. You refine it. You do not reject expression. You elevate its purpose. Speak when your words serve alignment. Remain silent when words would disperse it. This balance creates a powerful internal structure, one where energy is no longer constantly leaking outward, but circulating inward with stability. And from this stability, abundance begins to organize itself more naturally. Not because you are speaking it into existence, but because you are no longer scattering what is already forming. There is a final understanding within this principle. Silence is not what you do. It is what remains when you stop interfering, when you stop explaining prematurely, when you stop dispersing what is still becoming. What remains is presence, and presence is the true currency of creation.
This is the 10th principle of silent abundance, that what is held in sacred silence gathers power, while what is spoken too early loses coherence. So you move carefully now, not speaking less out of restriction, but speaking with precision, born from inner fullness, and allowing silence to become not absence of expression, but the source from which all true expression arises.
There is a power that does not grow through intensity, but through quiet return. It does not demand emotion. It does not require inspiration. It does not depend on the rise of belief or the clarity of vision. Instead, it deepens through repetition, unseen, uncelebrated, unannounced. This is the ritual of invisible repetition. Most abandon their inner practices because they mistake silence for absence of progress. They expect visible change too soon, forgetting that what is real in the unseen world matures slowly before it reveals itself outwardly. But the ancient path was never built on intensity. It was built on return. Return to the same inner state. Return to the same silent alignment. Return to the same unseen knowing again and again until it becomes more real than doubt. This repetition is not mechanical. It is sacred. Each return is not a copy of the previous one, but a deepening into the same truth. Like walking into the same ocean and finding it deeper each time, though the surface appears unchanged. You are invited now into this discipline, not as effort, but as devotion to consistency in silence. There is a practice that embodies this principle. Choose a single moment each day where you withdraw from external engagement. A moment untouched by distraction, where your awareness can settle without interruption. In that space, bring to mind, not as image, but as feeling, the quiet state of already being aligned with abundance. Not arriving, not seeking, already within. Let this feeling be simple. Not dramatic, not emotionally charged, just steady. Like something that does not need attention to continue existing. Then, remain with it for a short time. No forcing, no deep analysis, just presence. When you feel complete, release it and walk away. Do not try to extend it. Do not try to perfect it. Do not try to measure its effect. Then, later in the day, return again. Not to recreate something new, but to revisit the same inner state. This is repetition without strain. Repetition without performance. Repetition as remembrance. There is a story of a stone carver who worked on sacred structures that were said to hold unusual harmony. When asked how he achieved such precision, he said nothing about talent or inspiration. Instead, he described a simple practice. Each morning, before touching his tools, he would place his hands on the stone and remain still. He would feel nothing special, no vision, no insight, only presence. Then he would begin. But every hour he would stop again and return to the stone in silence. The same gesture, the same stillness, the same quiet return.
Those who watched him thought this interruption slowed his work. Yet his creations were the most refined in the region.
When asked why he paused so often, he said, "I am not repeating action. I am repeating alignment." This is the essence of invisible repetition. Not doing more, but returning to the same inner state until it becomes permanent. At first, your mind may resist this simplicity. It may ask for novelty. It may seek variation. It may believe that repetition without visible change is stagnation. But what is happening beneath the surface is far more subtle. Each return strengthens neural and energetic coherence. Each repetition removes fragmentation. Each silent re-entry stabilizes identity. Slowly, something begins to settle within you. You are no longer trying to access a state. You are recognizing that it is always available. There is also a deeper refinement within this practice. Over time, repetition becomes less deliberate and more natural. You begin to find yourself slipping into alignment without effort, without preparation, without ritual. It becomes your baseline. This is when invisible repetition transforms into embodied presence. And from this presence, external life begins to reorganize itself. Not dramatically, but consistently. You notice fewer internal contradictions, fewer emotional swings between doubt and certainty. A steady undercurrent of quiet knowing begins to accompany your actions. This is not because circumstances have changed first. It is because repetition has reshaped the internal structure from which you perceive circumstances. There is also a subtle danger to avoid. Do not turn repetition into obsession. Do not measure your progress through visible outcomes alone. This path does not respond to pressure. It responds to consistency in silence. Even when nothing seems to shift externally, something is consolidating internally. And that consolidation is what eventually manifests. You do not repeat to force results. You repeat to become the state from which results are inevitable. This is the turning point most do not recognize. They repeat until they become impatient, but the initiate repeats until they become indistinguishable from the state itself. And once that happens, repetition is no longer effort. It is nature. You are no longer practicing abundance. You are embodying the frequency from which abundance naturally flows. This is the 11th principle of silent abundance. That what is returned to repeatedly in silence becomes permanent in identity. So return gently. Return quietly. Return without expectation. And let repetition do what force never could. It transforms not what you do, but what you are.
There is a moment in every unfolding where nothing appears to be happening, yet everything is already in motion. This is the hidden alchemy of timing. To the untrained eye, silence looks like delay. Stillness looks like absence. Waiting looks like failure. But in the deeper architecture of existence, these are not empty spaces. They are preparation fields, where reality is quietly reorganizing itself beyond perception. The ancient understanding did not treat timing as coincidence or chance. It was seen as alignment
between inner readiness and outer emergence. When these two meet without resistance, manifestation feels effortless. When they are misaligned, even the smallest desire feels delayed. This is why force cannot accelerate what is not yet timed. It can only create distortion. There is a sacred intelligence that governs arrival. Not the arrival of things alone, but the arrival of you into the state where those things can naturally exist within your experience. You are not only waiting for outcomes, you are also being prepared for them. This is the unseen dimension of timing. There is a practice that allows you to begin sensing this.
There is a practice that allows you to begin sensing this deeper rhythm. It is not an action outwardly performed, but an inner adjustment of perception. When you notice desire arising, whether for change, expansion, or material form, do not immediately translate it into urgency. Instead, pause and ask inwardly, without language, is this already forming, or am I attempting to force what has not ripened? Do not answer with thought. Feel the answer. If there is tension, contraction, or impatience, you are meeting timing with resistance. If there is calm, even without clarity, you are in alignment with unfolding. This distinction is subtle, but essential. For timing does not respond to desire. It responds to coherence. There is a story from an old desert tradition of travelers who crossed vast stretches of land where water appeared only at precise intervals. Those who rushed ahead in desperation often arrived too early or too late, finding nothing but dry ground. But those who learned to move with the rhythm of the land itself, neither rushing nor delaying, arrived always at the moment of emergence. They did not find water. They met it. And they did not call it luck. They called it alignment with the unseen clock. In your own experience, you may begin to notice similar patterns. Events that once felt delayed begin to arrive without strain. Opportunities appear, not when you demand them, but when you are internally settled enough to receive them. This is not external acceleration. It is internal synchronization. You are entering the timing of your own unfolding. There is an important subtlety here. Do not mistake patience for passivity, and do not mistake action for control. The difference lies in state. Action taken in misalignment creates resistance. Action taken in alignment feels inevitable, even if it is simple. Sometimes timing will ask you to wait. Sometimes it will ask you to move. Both require the same quality: non-resistance. There is a quiet intelligence within you that already senses this rhythm, even if it has not been named. You may have experienced moments where everything suddenly aligned after a period of stillness, where what felt delayed simply arrived without warning, as if it had always been on its way. These are glimpses of unseen timing at work. They are not exceptions. They are reminders. As you deepen into this principle, your relationship with waiting begins to transform. Waiting is no longer emptiness. It becomes active preparation, a field in which internal conditions are being refined to match external emergence. You are not waiting for life to begin. You are aligning with the moment it becomes natural. There is also a refinement in how you respond to delay. Instead of frustration, you begin to observe. Instead of resistance, you begin to soften. You recognize that anything forced into premature arrival carries instability, and anything allowed to arrive in its own time carries coherence. This understanding dissolves urgency, not because you stop caring about outcomes, but because you stop believing they are separate from timing itself.
there is a deeper layer still. You begin to sense that your internal state is itself a timing mechanism. When you are scattered, timing feels delayed. When you are centered, timing feels precise.
When you are aligned, timing feels invisible because nothing feels out of place. Everything simply unfolds. This is why inner work and timing cannot be separated. They are the same movement expressed in different dimensions. One shapes the internal field. The other reflects it externally. As you continue walking this path, you may find that fewer things feel urgent. Not because life becomes slower, but because your perception of readiness becomes more refined. You begin to trust pauses. You begin to trust stillness. You begin to trust that what is meant to arrive cannot be missed when you are aligned with its timing. This trust is not intellectual. It is embodied. And from this embodiment, something profound emerges. You stop chasing life forward, and life begins to meet you where you are. This is the 12th principle of silent abundance, that timing is not something you control, but something you align with through inner coherence. So remain steady in the unseen rhythm. Do not rush what is unfolding. Do not resist what is pausing. And allow timing itself to become a silent intelligence guiding your becoming.
There is a form of wealth that no loss can touch. It cannot be stolen because it is not stored outside you. It cannot be destroyed because it is not built from matter. It cannot be taken away by circumstance because it does not depend on circumstance at all. This is inner wealth. The world defines wealth through visibility, what can be counted, displayed, or exchanged. Yet beneath all external forms of prosperity lies a deeper current, the state of consciousness from which all experience of having arises. When that state is unstable, wealth becomes fragile. When that state is rooted, wealth becomes unshakable. The ancient understanding was not that abundance is acquired, but that it is expressed through alignment. You do not gather it. You allow it to move through you without resistance. There is a quiet practice that reveals this truth, not as belief, but as lived experience. At any moment of stillness, turn your awareness inward, not toward thoughts of money or material gain, but toward the feeling of sufficiency itself. Not imagined sufficiency, but the subtle sense that nothing essential is missing in this moment. Even if external conditions suggest otherwise, you do not engage with them here. You rest in the deeper layer. This is not denial of reality. It is recognition of a deeper foundation beneath it. Remain here for a few moments. Let the feeling stabilize without forcing it. You may notice that at first, the mind resists this state. It may present reminders of lack, comparison, or urgency. Do not argue with these thoughts. Do not follow them. Simply return. Return again to the sense of inner sufficiency. There is a story of a traveler who lost everything during a long journey: his possessions, his provisions, even his map. Those who saw him believed he had been reduced to nothing. But he continued walking with a calmness that others could not understand. When asked how he remained steady, he said, "I discovered something that cannot be lost while I am still aware." He was not referring to objects. He was referring to inner presence. This presence is the core of unshakable wealth. When external support disappears, this remains. When conditions change,
this remains. When uncertainty arises, this remains. And from this remaining presence, all external reconstruction becomes possible again, not through desperation, but through coherence. This is why inner wealth precedes outer wealth, not as philosophy, but as structure. What you consistently feel as true about you becomes the lens
through which reality organizes itself. If you carry an inner sense of lack, even abundance will feel unstable when it appears. If you carry an inner sense of sufficiency, even simplicity becomes rich in experience. This is not metaphor. It is alignment. There is also a subtle shift that occurs when you begin to stabilize this inner wealth. You stop over-gripping external outcomes. You stop emotionally collapsing when things shift. You stop interpreting temporary absence as permanent loss. Instead, you begin to sense continuity beneath fluctuation, like a deep ocean beneath changing waves. The surface may move, but the depth remains unchanged. This is the state you are cultivating, and it cannot be taken because it is not possessed. It is embodied. There is another layer to this principle. Inner wealth changes your relationship
with desire itself. Desire no longer feels like desperation. It becomes clarity. You no longer pursue from emptiness. You move from fullness expressing itself. This shift is subtle, but profound. It changes the energetic signature of every action you take. There is no longer a sense of chasing, only unfolding. And because of this, external reality begins to respond differently. Opportunities that once felt distant begin to feel accessible. Decisions that once felt heavy become simple. Paths that once felt blocked begin to open. Not because the world has changed first, but because your perception of having has stabilized. You are no longer negotiating your worth with reality. You are expressing it from within. There is an important understanding here. Inner wealth does not reject external wealth. It removes dependence on it. This distinction is essential. For when you are no longer dependent, you are no longer reactive. And when you are no longer reactive, you become receptive in a deeper way. Not grasping, not fearing, simply allowing. As this state deepens, something remarkable happens. You begin to notice that even in moments of external scarcity, you do not collapse inwardly. And even in moments of external gain, you do not inflate. There is a steady center forming within you, unmoved, undisturbed, present. This is the beginning of true prosperity consciousness. Not accumulation, but stability of being. This is the 13th principle of silent abundance. That what is rooted within cannot be taken without your participation. So you begin to invest attention not in what comes and goes, but in what remains. And in that remaining, you discover a wealth that was never outside you to begin with. There is a state in which desire no longer reaches outward, not because it has disappeared, but because it has settled inward, no longer fragmented into pursuit, no longer expressed as need, no longer broadcast into the world in search of response. In this state, attraction becomes effortless, not because you are trying to attract,
but because you are no longer scattering what already aligns you. This is the silence that attracts without seeking. Most people unknowingly weaken their own field through constant mental outreach. They think about what they want, speak about what they lack, imagine what is missing, and in doing so, they continuously signal separation from what they desire. The field responds not to the object of desire, but to the state of distance from it.
And so the cycle continues. Wanting becomes reinforcement of absence. Effort becomes reinforcement of delay. But in silence, something different happens. The signal stops fragmenting. The energy returns inward, and coherence begins to form. There is a practice that allows you to enter this state, not through force, but through withdrawal of unnecessary projection. At a chosen moment in your day, sit in stillness without engaging in thought-driven visualization. Instead of imagining what you want, allow yourself to stop reaching toward it altogether. This is not rejection of desire. It is removal of tension from desire. Now, notice what remains when you are no longer projecting outward. At first, the mind may feel unsettled. It is accustomed to reaching, defining, rehearsing future outcomes. But if you remain steady, something else begins to surface. A quiet neutrality, not emptiness, but completeness without movement. This is the field of silent attraction. In this state, you are not calling anything toward you. You are no longer sending fragmented signals of lack. You are simply being a coherent point of awareness. And coherence, by its nature, organizes experience around itself. There is a story from an old tradition of a forest-dwelling teacher who never spoke of manifestation, yet whose life appeared to unfold with precise alignment. Those who came to him seeking instruction often expected rituals,
techniques, or verbal guidance. Instead, he would simply sit with them in silence. At first, they felt nothing. But over time, something began to shift in those who remained. Their urgency softened. Their inner noise quieted. Their sense of lack dissolved without explanation. When asked what he was doing, he said, "I am not calling anything to you. I am removing what prevents you from recognizing what is already moving toward you." This is the nature of silent attraction. It is not addition. It is removal. Removal of interference. Removal of fragmentation. Removal of the constant internal message that says, not yet, not here, not enough. As you begin to practice this, you may notice subtle changes. Desires feel less urgent. Thoughts of lack arise less frequently. And when they do arise, they lose their emotional charge more quickly. You are no longer feeding them with attention. This is not suppression. It is non-participation. And in non-participation, energy returns to its natural center. There is a deeper refinement to this principle. When you stop seeking energetically, you begin to sense the difference between impulse and alignment. Impulse is reactive. It pushes outward from tension. Alignment is quiet. It arises from stillness. Only alignment creates stable attraction. Everything else creates fluctuation. There will be moments when the mind attempts to reintroduce seeking. It may disguise itself as planning, analyzing, or positive thinking. But you will begin to recognize its texture. It feels scattered. It feels urgent. It feels like reaching. And you will gently step back. Not resisting, not engaging,
just returning to silence. This return is the practice. Each return strengthens coherence. Each moment of non-seeking restores alignment. Over time, something subtle begins to shift. You find that opportunities appear without pursuit. Connections form without force. Timing aligns without planning. It is not that life becomes random in your favor. It is that your field becomes less distorted, allowing what is already aligned with you to reach you without obstruction. There is also a change in how you experience inner desire itself. It becomes quieter, more refined, less emotional, more certain. You begin to feel what is meant for you not as longing, but as recognition, as if something within you already knows its place in your life. This knowing does not push, it does not chase, it simply rests. And from that rest, movement in the outer world becomes effortless. This is the paradox of silent attraction, that what comes to you most naturally arrives when you are no longer trying to bring it. This is the 14th principle of silent abundance, that attraction is not generated through pursuit, but revealed through the cessation of inner fragmentation. So you do not seek, you settle. And in that settling, life begins to move toward you in ways that effort could never orchestrate.
There is a place within you that does not need to respond. It is untouched by urgency, unshaken by praise or criticism, unmoved by the constant invitation to react. This place does not withdraw from life. It observes it without fragmentation.
This is the discipline of non-reaction. Most of life is lived in reflex. A word is spoken and you respond. A situation arises and you adjust. A memory appears and you relive it. In this continuous chain of reaction, your inner state is constantly being shaped by what is outside you. And so the outer world becomes the ruler of your inner world. But there is another way. The ancient understanding was simple. Whoever reacts least is least disturbed by illusion. For reaction is not awareness, it is participation without space. When you react immediately, you enter the event before you have understood it. You merge with its surface without accessing its depth. And in that merging, clarity is lost. Non-reaction is not suppression, it is space. The space between stimulus and response, where awareness remains sovereign. There is a practice that begins to restore this space. It is subtle, and it begins in ordinary moments. When something arises that typically triggers you, emotionally, mentally, or energetically, pause before responding. Not to suppress expression, but to observe the impulse to react itself. In that pause, something important is revealed. You are no longer inside the reaction. You are witnessing it forming. And in witnessing, you are no longer bound by it. There was a story of a monk who lived near a busy village square. Every day, people would pass by, shouting, arguing, celebrating, complaining. Noise filled the air constantly. Yet the monk remained still. One day, a man approached him and asked, "How do you remain undisturbed in such chaos?" The monk replied, "The world is not disturbing. My reaction to it is what once was."
To it is what once was. This is the essence of non-reaction. The outer world continues, but your participation in its disturbance decreases. As you practice this, you begin to notice a subtle shift. Situations that once pulled you into emotional entanglement begin to lose their grip. Words that once lingered in your mind begin to dissolve quickly. Events that once demanded interpretation begin to pass through you without imprint. This is not detachment from life. It is detachment from unconscious involvement. There is also a deeper transformation occurring. When reaction decreases, perception becomes clearer. You begin to see situations as they are, not as they are interpreted through emotional momentum. And in this clarity, your responses become more precise. Not faster, more accurate. There is a difference. Reaction is fast, but distorted. Response is quiet, but aligned. One emerges from tension. The other emerges from awareness. As you deepen in this discipline, you will notice that silence within you expands, not externally enforced, but naturally arising. You no longer feel the need to comment on everything. You no longer feel compelled to emotionally engage with every event. You begin to conserve energy that was previously
Spent in unconscious response begins to gather. This is where silent abundance becomes more stable, because energy that is not scattered in reaction becomes available for creation, clarity, and alignment. There is an important subtlety here. Non-reaction does not mean indifference. It means presence without distortion. You still feel, but you do not immediately become the feeling. You still observe life, but you do not dissolve into every wave of it. There is a quiet center forming within you that remains untouched while everything else moves. And from this center, you begin to act differently. Your words carry more weight because they are not born from reaction. Your decisions carry more clarity because they are not clouded by emotional momentum. Your presence becomes steadier because it is no longer constantly being pulled outward. There will be moments when you fail to remain in non-reaction. This is not a failure. It is part of retraining attention. When you notice that you have been pulled into reaction, simply return. Without judgment, without story, just return to space. Each return strengthens awareness. Each pause restores sovereignty. Over time, the gap between stimulus and response widens naturally. And in that gap, something profound emerges. Choice. Not conditioned response, but conscious movement. This is where transformation begins to stabilize. Not in controlling life, but in no longer being controlled by immediate reaction to it. This is the 15th principle of silent abundance. That what is not reacted to is no longer able to shape your inner state. So you remain steady, not numb, not withdrawn, but awake within the space before reaction. And in that space, you reclaim the power to respond from alignment rather than impulse.
There is a strength that does not come from progress, but from return. Not forward movement alone, but the quiet discipline of coming back, again and again, to the same inner place where clarity lives, untouched by circumstance. This is the ritual of daily return. Most people move through their inner work as if it must constantly advance. They seek new insights, new states, new revelations, and in doing so, they unknowingly leave behind what was already true in pursuit of what feels newer. But truth in the silent path is not something that changes. It is something that is returned to. Like a well that does not become more water each time you visit, but becomes more known to you in its depth. There is a misunderstanding that growth must always feel like expansion outward. Yet in the deeper rhythm of inner alignment, growth is often a return inward to something already present, but previously unnoticed. This is why repetition is sacred. Not because it adds something new each time, but because it removes distance. There is a practice that embodies this principle. Once each day, choose a moment where you consciously return, not to thought, not to planning, not to reflection on outcomes, but to the simple recognition of your inner state. Not who you are becoming, but what remains when becoming is not required. Sit quietly. Let the outer world lose importance for a few moments, and turn your awareness inward, as if you were arriving at something familiar. Not discovering, remembering. You may notice that the mind attempts to reintroduce progress. It may ask, what have I achieved? Or what has changed? Do not follow these questions. They belong to measurement.
and measurement pulls awareness outward. Instead, return again to presence, to stillness, to the simple fact of being. There is a story of a temple keeper who tended a sacred space deep within a mountain. Pilgrims came from distant lands, expecting rituals of complexity.
Pilgrims came from distant lands, expecting rituals of complexity, expecting transformation through ceremony and instruction. But the keeper offered something simpler. Each visitor was asked to sit in silence at the same spot where countless others had sat before. No explanation, no teaching, only return. Many left disappointed, believing nothing had happened. But those who stayed longer began to notice something subtle. Not an external vision, not a dramatic revelation, but a quiet settling within themselves, as if something scattered had found its place again. When asked what the temple was meant to do, the keeper said, "It does not give anything new. It returns you to what has never left." This is the essence of daily return. You are not creating a new self each day. You are re-entering the same state of alignment until it becomes stable enough that you no longer leave it unconsciously. At first, this return may feel like effort. You may forget, you may drift, you may become absorbed in external noise. This is natural. Return is not perfection. It is repetition of awareness. Each time you remember to come back, you strengthen the pathway inward. And slowly, the return becomes faster, more natural, less effortful, until one day you realize you are no longer leaving as often as you once did. There is also a deeper shift that begins to occur. Your inner state becomes less dependent on external correction. You no longer require circumstances to align before you feel aligned. Instead, alignment becomes your starting point. And from that starting point, circumstances begin to reorganize more smoothly. Not because you forced them, but because you stopped abandoning yourself internally. This is an important realization. Much of perceived instability in life is not caused by external chaos alone. It is caused by internal departure from center, and return restores that center. There is a refinement within this practice. The return is not emotional. It is not dramatic. It is quiet, almost unnoticeable, like remembering something you never truly forgot. You do not force yourself into stillness. You allow yourself to settle back into it. As this continues, something stabilizes within you. A quiet continuity of awareness begins to form. Even in activity, a part of you remains anchored. Even in conversation, a part of you remains still. Even in movement, a part of you remains unchanged. This is the beginning of embodied presence. And from this presence, life becomes less fragmented. Decisions become simpler. Emotions become less destabilizing. Time feels less fractured. There is a continuity forming beneath experience. And that continuity is what begins to attract coherence in your outer world. Not through effort, but through consistency of return. This is the 15th principle of silent abundance, that what is repeatedly returned to in awareness becomes the foundation of lived reality. So you do not chase newness, you return to depth. And in that return, everything that is truly meant for you begins to organize itself around a stable center within you. There is a place within you where intention exists before language. Before you define what you want, before you name what you seek, before you translate desire into thought, there is a quieter formation happening beneath it all. This is the altar of unspoken intent. Most intentions are spoken too early, even within the mind. They are shaped into words, structured into plans, repeated through imagination.
And in doing so, they are exposed to distortion before they have fully taken form. But true intention is not constructed through thought. It is revealed through stillness. The ancient understanding held that intention is most powerful when it remains unarticulated until it is complete within the inner field. For what is still forming is sensitive to interference.
And what is complete within silence carries coherence into expression without fragmentation. You are invited now to enter this inner altar, not as imagination, but as recognition. There is a practice that begins this alignment. Sit in quiet space where you will not be interrupted. Let your awareness settle, not into thinking, but into listening. Not listening outwardly, but inwardly. At first, there may seem to be nothing to hear, but stay longer than the surface silence. Beneath it, you will begin to sense subtle movements, impulses, inclinations, directions that have not yet become thoughts. Do not name them. Do not shape them. Do not rush to define them. Simply observe their presence. This is intention before form. It is not yet desire. It is not yet plan. It is potential becoming aware of itself. There is a story of a silent architect who was known for designing structures that seemed to emerge perfectly aligned with their environment. People believed he worked quickly, almost instinctively. But those who observed closely knew otherwise. He spent long periods without drawing anything, without speaking, without external expression. He would simply sit with the land, the space, the environment. When asked what he was doing during these long silences, he said, "I wait until the design stops being separate from me." This is the essence of unspoken intent. It is not something you create. It is something you allow to reveal itself fully before you act. Most people reverse this process. They act first, then adjust. They speak first, then refine. They decide first, then question. And so their outcomes carry fragmentation. But when intention is allowed to complete itself in silence, action becomes precise before it begins. There is no correction needed later. There is less resistance in the unfolding. There is a quiet certainty that accompanies movement. As you continue this practice, you will begin to notice a subtle shift. Your desires become quieter, not weaker, more refined, less scattered, more essential. You begin to distinguish between what arises from external influence and what arises from inner coherence. External influence feels noisy. It often carries urgency. Inner coherence feels still. It often carries clarity without pressure. This distinction is crucial, for much of what people believe they desire is shaped by reflection, comparison, or reaction. But unspoken intent arises from a deeper layer. It is not borrowed. It is not imitated. It is revealed. And because it is revealed in silence, it carries integrity. There is another layer to this principle. When intention is held in silence long enough to stabilize, it begins to influence perception itself. You start noticing opportunities you previously overlooked. You begin to recognize paths that were always present, but not previously seen. It is not that reality is changing faster. It is that your awareness is becoming more coherent. There is less distortion, less noise, more clarity. And from clarity, appropriate action becomes obvious without effort. This is why premature expression weakens manifestation. Not because speaking is harmful, but because speaking too early interrupts formation. It moves energy from inner completion
to outer exposure. And exposure often introduces fragmentation before stability is reached. So you learn to hold, not suppress, not deny, but hold. Until the intention no longer feels fragile. Until it no longer shifts with emotion. Until it feels settled within you, as if it has always belonged there. Then, when action arises, it feels natural. Not forced, not chosen through struggle, but recognized. There is also a subtle transformation that occurs within you through this practice. You begin to trust silence more than urgency. You begin to trust inner coherence more than external validation. You begin to trust what is forming before it is visible. This trust is not belief. It is experience repeated. And repetition builds certainty. Over time, something remarkable happens. You speak less about what you are creating. Not because you are hiding it, but because it no longer needs reinforcement. It is already established internally. And what is established internally no longer requires external confirmation to continue forming. This is the sacred discipline of unspoken intent. It protects what is fragile. It refines what is forming. It stabilizes what is becoming. And it allows manifestation to emerge without distortion. This is the 17th principle of silent abundance. That intention held in silence completes its form before expression, making outer action precise and aligned.
So you remain in the altar, not speaking prematurely, not shaping too early, but allowing what is within you to fully become itself before it enters the world. There is a cost to everything you give attention to. Not in the way the world measures cost, but in a subtler currency. Your life force, your clarity, your inner coherence. Every thought you entertain, every emotion you amplify, every reaction you sustain, draws from the same finite stream of awareness. This is energetic economy. Most people live as though their attention is infinite. They scatter it across conversations, worries, projections, memories, and imagined futures, rarely noticing that every fragment of attention is an exchange of energy. And in fragmentation, power weakens. The ancient path taught something different, that mastery begins with economy, not expansion, not doing more, but spending less of yourself on what does not align. You are not here to engage with everything. You are here to remain intact within yourself while life moves around you. There is a quiet discipline that begins this refinement. At intervals throughout your day, pause, not to analyze your life, but to observe where your attention has been going. Do not judge it, simply notice. Was it directed toward clarity or toward noise? Toward creation or toward reaction? Toward silence or toward fragmentation? This observation alone begins to rewire your energetic distribution. For awareness, once seen, begins to reorganize itself. There is a story of a water bearer who carried 2 vessels from a distant spring to a village each day. One vessel was perfect, the other had cracks. By the time he reached his destination, the cracked vessel was always half empty. The vessel felt ashamed and said, "I am failing you. I cannot hold
what you give me." The water bearer replied, "Look at the path." Along the cracked vessel's side, flowers had grown, wild, beautiful, unexpected. He said, "I planted seeds there. I knew your nature, so I used your leaks to create beauty." But the cracked vessel had still lost much of its water. This is the truth of unregulated attention. Even when something beautiful emerges from it, much is still lost through leakage.
Energetic economy is not about suppression. It is about precision, choosing where your awareness flows, and more importantly, where it does not. There is a practice that supports this refinement. Throughout your day, notice moments when your attention drifts into unnecessary engagement, internal commentary, emotional reactivity, mental replay of past events, or projection into uncertain futures. At these moments, do not forcefully retract. Simply recognize and return. Not to a new thought, not to correction, but to stillness beneath thought. This return is the act of conserving energy. Over time, you begin to notice that less of your inner life is being spent on non-essential movement, and what remains becomes more potent, clearer, more stable. There is another layer to this principle. When your attention becomes economical, your perception becomes sharper. You begin to notice what is essential without effort. You see through unnecessary complexity. You feel when something is aligned or misaligned without analysis. This clarity is not created. It is revealed through reduced internal noise. There is also a subtle shift in emotional experience. Emotions still arise, but they no longer consume your entire field. They pass through without occupying all of you. You remain intact within them. This is energetic sovereignty, and it only emerges when attention is no longer freely dispersed. There will be moments when old habits return, when attention becomes scattered again. This is not failure. It is feedback. Each time you notice, you return. And each return strengthens economy. Not through effort, but through awareness itself learning to conserve its own power. There is also a deeper realization that begins to form. You are not the content of your attention. You are the field in which attention moves. And when that field is undisturbed, everything within it becomes more orderly. This is why silence is not passive. It is highly efficient. It removes unnecessary expenditure of awareness and redirects energy toward coherence. As this discipline matures, something changes in how life responds to you. You become less reactive to distraction, less entangled in unnecessary engagement, more steady in presence. And from that steadiness, external life begins to reflect a similar order. Not because you controlled it, but because you stopped fragmenting your inner field. This is the 18th principle of silent abundance, that what you do not spend attention on loses influence over your inner state. So you become selective, not rigid, not withdrawn, but precise in where your awareness is allowed to flow. And in that precision, your inner power begins to accumulate naturally, without force, without strain, without depletion. There is a place within you that does not ask permission to exist. It does not depend on approval. It does not bend toward opinion. It does not reorganize itself around the expectations of others. It simply is, steady, unclaimed, untouched by external interpretation. This is the garden of inner sovereignty. Most people unknowingly abandon this garden early in life. They allow the voices of others to define its boundaries, to decide what should grow within it, to determine what is worthy of attention. Over time, the garden becomes less lived in from within and more managed from outside. And in that management, something essential is lost. Spontaneity becomes hesitation. Clarity becomes doubt. Inner direction becomes dependence. But sovereignty is not something you gain. It is something you reclaim. There is a practice that begins this return, not through rebellion, but through quiet recentering. At a moment of stillness, turn your awareness inward,
and ask a simple question.
Not as thought, but as feeling. What within me belongs only to me? Do not search for an answer in language. Let the question settle into silence, and notice what arises beneath interpretation. There is a subtle recognition that begins to surface, a sense of presence that does not require validation, a direction that does not seek approval, a knowing that exists independently of external agreement.
This is the soil of sovereignty. There is a story of a gardener who tended a vast estate filled with plants brought by many travelers. Each visitor had planted something different, some beautiful, some chaotic, some invasive. Over time, the garden became crowded, unpredictable, and difficult to maintain. One day, the gardener stopped accepting new seeds. He did not explain. He did not argue. He simply began observing what naturally belongs. Slowly, he removed what did not align with the original harmony of the land. Not violently, not abruptly, but with quiet discernment. Those who visited later asked, "Why did you change the garden so much?" He replied, "I did not change it. I returned it." This is the essence of inner sovereignty. It is not addition. It is restoration. As you begin to cultivate this within yourself, you may notice how much of your inner world has been shaped by external influence. Opinions you absorbed, expectations you inherited, identities you adopted without conscious choice. Sovereignty begins when you observe this without judgment, and then gently, silently, begin to release what does not belong. Not everything at once, not through force, but through awareness. There is another layer to this practice.
As your inner sovereignty strengthens, you begin to sense a quiet boundary forming within you. Not a barrier against life, but a clarity of what enters your field. You become more selective, not in judgment of others, but in protection of your inner coherence. Conversations that once easily pulled you into distortion lose their influence. Opinions that once felt overwhelming begin to pass through without imprint. External noise no longer reshapes your internal landscape as easily as before. This is not detachment, it is clarity. And clarity is the natural state of sovereignty. There is also a profound shift that begins to occur in decision-making. You no longer rely as heavily on external validation. You begin to feel decisions from within, rather than construct them through comparison. There is a quiet certainty that arises, not loud, not emotional, but steady. This certainty does not demand agreement. It simply guides. And when followed, it often leads to outcomes that feel unexpectedly aligned, even if they were not logically predictable. This is because sovereignty is connected to a deeper intelligence within you, an intelligence that does not operate through noise, but through coherence. As you continue this practice, you will notice that your inner world
becomes less reactive to external conditions. Approval becomes less necessary. Criticism becomes less destabilizing. Comparison loses its emotional weight. And in that space, something stabilizes. A sense of self that does not fluctuate with circumstance. This is inner wealth in its sovereign form. Not dependent, not reactive, not borrowed. There will be moments when old patterns attempt to return, when external voices feel louder than your inner knowing. In those moments, you do not fight them. You simply return to your garden, to your inner space, to the quiet recognition of what belongs to you alone. Each return strengthens sovereignty.
Each moment of awareness restores alignment. And over time, something remarkable happens. You begin to move through life without constant inner negotiation. Your energy is no longer spent on maintaining borrowed identities. It is conserved within your own field. And from that conservation, clarity deepens. This is the 19th principle of silent abundance, that what is reclaimed inwardly becomes untouchable by outer influence. So you tend your inner garden carefully, not by controlling everything that enters it, but by knowing what truly belongs within it, and allowing everything else to fall away naturally.
There is a place within you that does not ask permission to exist. It does not depend on approval. It does not bend toward opinion. It does not reorganize itself around the expectations of others. It simply is, steady, unclaimed, untouched by external interpretation. This is the garden of inner sovereignty. Most people unknowingly abandon this garden early in life. They allow the voices of others to define its boundaries, to decide what should grow within it, to determine what is worthy of attention. Over time, the garden becomes less lived in from within and more managed from outside. And in that management, something essential is lost. Spontaneity becomes hesitation. Clarity becomes doubt. Inner direction becomes dependence. But sovereignty is not something you gain. It is something you reclaim. There is a practice that begins this return, not through rebellion, but through quiet recentering. At a moment of stayness, turn your awareness inward and ask a simple question, not as thought, but as feeling. What within me belongs only to me? Do not search for an answer in language. Let the question settle into silence. And notice what arises beneath interpretation. There is a subtle recognition that begins to surface, a sense of presence that does not require validation, a direction that does not seek approval, a knowing that exists independently of external agreement.
This is the soil of sovereignty. There is a story of a gardener who tended a vast estate filled with plants brought by many travelers. Each visitor had planted something different, some beautiful, some chaotic, some invasive. Over time, the garden became crowded, unpredictable, and difficult to maintain. One day, the gardener stopped accepting new seeds. He did not explain. He did not argue. He simply began observing what naturally belonged. Slowly, he removed what did not align with the original harmony of the land. Not violently, not abruptly, but with quiet discernment. Those who visited later asked, "Why did you change the garden so much?" He replied, "I did not change it. I returned it." This is the essence of inner sovereignty. It is not addition. It is restoration. As you begin to cultivate this within yourself, you may notice how much of your inner world has been shaped by external influence. Opinions you absorbed, expectations you inherited, identities you adopted without conscious choice. Sovereignty begins when you observe this without judgment, and then gently, silently, begin to release what does not belong. Not everything at once, not through force, but through awareness. There is another layer to this practice. As your inner sovereignty strengthens, you begin to sense a quiet boundary forming within you. Not a barrier against life, but a clarity of what enters your field. You become more selective, not in judgment of others, but in protection of your inner coherence. Conversations that once easily pulled you into distortion lose their influence.
Opinions that once felt overwhelming begin to pass through without imprint. External noise no longer reshapes your internal landscape as easily
before. This is not detachment. It is clarity. And clarity is the natural state of sovereignty. There is also a profound shift that begins to occur in decision-making. You no longer rely as heavily on external validation. You begin to feel decisions from within, rather than construct them through comparison. There is a quiet certainty that arises, not loud, not emotional, but steady. This certainty does not demand agreement. It simply guides. And when followed, it often leads to outcomes that feel unexpectedly aligned, even if they were not logically predictable. This is because sovereignty is connected to a deeper intelligence within you. An intelligence that does not operate through noise, but through coherence. As you continue this practice, you will notice that your inner world becomes less reactive to external conditions. Approval becomes less necessary. Criticism becomes less destabilizing. Comparison loses its emotional weight. And in that space, something stabilizes. A sense of self that does not fluctuate with circumstance. This is inner wealth in its sovereign form. Not dependent, not reactive, not borrowed. There will be moments when old patterns attempt to return, when external voices feel louder than your inner knowing. In those moments, you do not fight them. You simply return to your garden, to your inner space, to the quiet recognition of what belongs to you alone. Each return strengthens sovereignty. Each moment of awareness restores alignment. And over time, something remarkable happens. You begin to move through life without constant inner negotiation. Your energy is no longer spent on maintaining borrowed identities. It is conserved within your own field. And from that conservation, clarity deepens. This is the 19th principle of silent abundance, that what is reclaimed inwardly becomes untouchable by outer influence. So you tend your inner garden carefully, not by controlling everything that enters it, but by knowing what truly belongs within it, and allowing everything else to fall away naturally.
There is a point in every unfolding where the work is already finished, yet nothing appears changed. To the senses, it still looks incomplete. To the mind, it still feels unresolved. But in the deeper field, where outcomes are formed, the pattern has already closed. The shape has already been set. The reality has already aligned itself around what is now inevitable. This is the law of unseen completion.
Most people mistake completion for visibility. They believe something is only done when it can be seen, confirmed, or measured. But in the silent architecture of existence, completion happens first within the unseen, long before it appears in form. And if you disturb it too early, you interfere with its natural expression. There is a subtle discipline required here, to recognize when something has already completed energetically, even if it has not yet manifested physically. This recognition is not intellectual, it is felt. There is a quiet sense of finality that arises when you are no longer pushing, no longer forcing, no longer internally negotiating with the outcome. It feels like stillness after movement, not empty, but settled. This is completion in the unseen field. You are invited now to become sensitive to this state. At various moments throughout your day, especially when focusing on a desire, intention, or change, pause and gently ask inwardly, is this still forming, or has it already settled? Do not answer through thought. Feel the state of it. If there is urgency, repetition, or emotional strain, it is still forming through resistance. But if there is quiet neutrality, if something within you feels calmly finished, even without outer proof, then completion has already occurred at the level that matters most. There is a story of an ancient sculptor who was known for carving figures that seemed to carry life within them. Visitors often assumed he worked continuously, refining every detail until perfection was achieved. But those who observed him closely noticed something unusual. He would spend long periods doing nothing. No carving, no shaping, no visible progress. Then, suddenly, he would make only a few precise movements and stop. When asked why he worked in such pauses, he said, "The form is not created by my hands. My hands only follow what has already completed itself inside the stone." This is the nature of unseen completion. The work is not done through constant effort.
It is revealed through alignment with what has already resolved itself in the deeper layer. As you begin to understand this principle, something important shifts within you. You stop overworking what is already complete. You stop revisiting what no longer requires adjustment. You stop mentally reopening what has already settled. And in doing so, your energy is conserved. There is a great leakage that happens when people continuously revisit what is already energetically complete. They replay scenarios. They reimagine outcomes. They re-enter finished states with doubt, which fragments coherence. But when you allow completion to remain untouched, something stabilizes. It begins to move outward on its own timeline. There is also a refinement in your emotional relationship with desire. Desire no longer feels like tension. It becomes recognition of what has already been set in motion. This removes urgency. And with urgency removed, clarity increases. You begin to notice that the most aligned actions are often small, simple, and almost obvious. Not forced, not complex, but precise. There is another layer to this law. Unseen completion often precedes visible manifestation by a period of stillness. This stillness is not delay. It is integration. The external world is reorganizing itself to match what has already been completed internally. But if you interrupt this phase with doubt, impatience, or repeated re-engagement, you disturb the integration process. So you learn a new discipline: to leave what is complete alone, even when you cannot yet see it, even when the mind demands confirmation.
Even when external conditions appear unchanged, you trust the deeper completion. There is a subtle peace that begins to form when this is understood. A quiet confidence that does not depend on immediate evidence. You are no longer trying to force reality into alignment. You are observing alignment unfold from what has already settled within the unseen field. This changes your entire relationship with time. Time is no longer a race toward outcome. It becomes a space in which completion reveals itself.
You begin to move differently. Less interruption, less reworking, less internal agitation, and more allowing. There will still be moments when doubt arises, when the mind says nothing has changed.
But you begin to recognize that this statement refers only to the visible layer, and the visible layer is always last to update. So you remain steady, not waiting in tension, but resting in completion that has not yet appeared. This is a subtle but powerful shift. You are no longer creating from lack. You are allowing from completion. And this is where manifestation stabilizes. Because what is already complete does not need to be forced. It only needs space to appear.
This is the 20th principle of silent abundance. That what is completed in the unseen field does not require continued effort, only non-interference. So you step back gently, not abandoning your desire, but honoring its completion before its appearance. And in that honoring, you allow reality to finish aligning itself without disruption.
There is a hidden heaviness that most people carry without noticing. It is not found in the body, yet the body feels it. It is not stored in memory alone, yet memory feeds it. It is not visible in the world, yet it shapes how the world is experienced. This heaviness is accumulation without clarity. Thoughts left unfinished, emotions left unprocessed, intentions left scattered, inner dialogues that never resolve, only repeat. Over time, this creates energetic clutter. And clutter is not neutral. It reduces flow. The ancient understanding of inner refinement was not about gaining more insight, but about removing what disturbs clarity. Not addition, but purification. Not complexity, but simplicity restored through awareness. You are invited now into the discipline of uncluttering, not externally, but within your energetic field. There is a practice that begins this process. At a moment of stillness, gently turn inward and observe your current inner landscape without judgment. Do not try to fix anything. Do not try to analyze anything. Simply notice what is active within you. Is there unfinished thought looping in the background? Is there emotional residue from recent interactions? Is there anticipation or worry quietly occupying space? Do not engage with these patterns. Only see them. This seeing is already the beginning of release. There is a story of a mountain-dwelling monk who was known for his extraordinary clarity. People would travel long distances to speak with him, expecting wisdom delivered through complex teachings. But he rarely offered explanations. Instead, he would sit with visitors in silence for long periods. When they asked why he said so little, he replied, "The mind that is full cannot receive what is already present." His practice was not to add knowledge. It was to remove inner noise until clarity revealed itself naturally. This is the essence of energetic uncluttering. You are not trying to become something new. You are clearing what obscures what already is. As you begin to practice this, you may notice that much of your inner activity is unnecessary repetition. The mind revisits situations long after they are complete. It replays conversations. It constructs alternative outcomes. It generates commentary on experiences that no longer require engagement. This repetition is not insight. It is residue. And residue consumes energy.
So you learn to notice it earlier, not to fight it, but to stop feeding it. Each time you do not engage, something begins to settle. There is also emotional clutter. Feelings that were never fully acknowledged, reactions that were never fully released, tensions that were never allowed to complete their cycle. These do not disappear on their own.
They remain as subtle background noise until they are observed without resistance. In observation without interference, they begin to dissolve. Not instantly, but naturally, like dust settling when the air is still. There is an important distinction here. Uncluttering is not suppression. It is completion. You are not pushing anything away. You are allowing what is already active to finish its movement without adding new disturbance. As this practice deepens, something begins to shift within you. Your inner world becomes quieter. Not empty, but less fragmented. Thoughts still arise, but they do not multiply unnecessarily. Emotions still arise, but they do not linger beyond their natural cycle. Your awareness begins to feel more spacious. And in that space, clarity emerges without effort. There is also a change in how you engage with external life. You become less reactive because there is less internal accumulation to trigger reaction. You respond more directly because there is less interference between perception and awareness. You begin to sense what is essential more quickly, without overthinking. This is the natural result of uncluttered perception. There is another layer to this discipline. Energetic clutter often creates a false sense of urgency. The mind feels busy, so it assumes something must be done. But much of this urgency is not signal. It is residue. When uncluttered, urgency decreases naturally. Not because life becomes slower, but because unnecessary tension is removed. And in the absence of tension, right action becomes more visible. There will be moments when clutter returns. This is not failure. It is part of ongoing awareness. Each time you notice, you do not judge. You simply return to clarity. Over time, the gaps between clutter and recognition become shorter, and clarity becomes your baseline. There is a quiet transformation that begins to take place. You realize that much of what you once considered necessary thinking was actually noise, and what remains is a simpler, more stable inner field. From this field, decisions feel lighter, direction feels clearer, and life feels less entangled. This is not because complexity has disappeared from the world, but because it no longer accumulates within you unnecessarily. This is the 21st principle of silent abundance, that clarity is not created by adding insight, but by removing energetic residue that obscures perception. So you begin to live with less internal accumulation, less unfinished movement, less lingering noise. And in that simplicity, something profound becomes available. A mind that is clear enough to receive life as it is unfolding, without distortion. There is a moment where nothing is done, yet everything begins to arrive. Not through effort, not through pursuit, not through repetition of desire, but through a subtle shift in state, where you are no longer reaching outward, and you are no longer resisting inward. This is the threshold of invisible receiving. Most people think receiving is an action. They imagine it as something that happens when something finally comes to them. But in the deeper order of existence, receiving is not an event. It is a condition of alignment. What arrives is always secondary to what you are able to hold. If your inner field is tense, what arrives is distorted. If your inner field is fragmented, what arrives is unstable.
But when the inner field becomes quiet, coherent, and open without expectation, receiving happens without effort. There is a practice that gently reveals this state. At a quiet moment, sit without intention to change anything within you. Do not try to manifest. Do not try to clear. Do not try to align. Simply remain present. Now notice a subtle habit of reaching that may still exist within awareness. It is not physical reaching. It is inner reaching. The mind leaning forward toward outcomes. The emotional field scanning for future completion. The subtle sense that something is still on the way and must be drawn closer. Do not fight this reaching. Just notice it and allow it to soften on its own. There is a story from an old river tradition where seekers would come to learn the art of still water. They believed still water was passive, waiting to be filled. But the teacher explained otherwise. He said, "Water receives not by grasping what comes, but by no longer resisting what is already arriving." To demonstrate, he would place a bowl beneath a slow drip from a cave ceiling. At first, the water splashed and scattered. But as the bowl remained perfectly still over time, the surface became calm enough that each drop merged seamlessly into the whole. Nothing was done to the water. Only disturbance was removed. This is the nature of invisible receiving. You do not pull life toward you. You become still enough that life can enter without fragmentation. As you begin to embody this principle, something subtle shifts. Desire becomes less urgent, not because it disappears, but because it no longer feels separate from your present state. The gap between here and there begins to soften. And in that softening, anticipation loses intensity. There is a deeper intelligence that begins to operate within you at this stage. You start noticing that what is meant for you does not require strain to approach. It does not need to be chased. It does not need to be forced. It appears when internal resistance is no longer interfering with its arrival. This is why receiving is not about effort. It is about absence of obstruction. There is another layer to this threshold. Most people unconsciously fill their inner space with expectation before anything arrives. They preform experiences and imagination and then attempt to align reality with those expectations. But expectation is a subtle form of tension. It narrows the field of possibility. In invisible receiving, expectation dissolves into openness. Not emptiness, but openness without definition. This allows reality to arrive in its most accurate form, not shaped by mental projection. As this practice deepens, you may begin to notice moments where things arrive without warning. Solutions appear without planning. Connections form without pursuit. Opportunities emerge without visible cause. It may feel sudden, but it is not sudden. It is the result of a field that has become unobstructed. There is also a shift in your emotional relationship with waiting. Waiting no longer feels like absence. It becomes neutrality. And in neutrality, the mind stops trying to accelerate what is already in motion. This creates space. And in space, arrival becomes natural. There will still be moments when impatience arises. This is part of the conditioning of the mind. When it appears, do not resist it. Simply notice that impatience is a form of inner reaching, and then soften again. Return to stillness. Return to openness. Return to the threshold
where nothing is being forced. Over time, something begins to stabilize. You no longer feel the need to constantly adjust your inner state to attract outcomes. Instead, your inner state becomes the attraction field itself, not through effort, but through coherence. And from this coherence, life begins to respond with greater fluidity, not because you demanded it, but because you stopped interrupting it. This is the 22nd principle of silent abundance.
That receiving occurs not through effort to obtain, but through the removal of inner resistance to what is already arriving. So you remain at the threshold, not reaching, not blocking, but allowing. And in that allowing, life begins to enter you without distortion.
There is a space within you that exists before you become anything, before identity forms, before roles are accepted, before labels are worn like skin. In that space, you are neither what you were told you are, nor what you are trying to become. You are something quieter, unfixed, unnamed, undisturbed. This is the silence between identity and becoming. Most of life is spent inside identity, maintaining it, defending it, improving it, or escaping it. Even spiritual seeking can become another identity, another shape the mind clings to in its attempt to define itself. But beneath all becoming is a still layer that does not participate in definition. It simply remains aware. And that awareness is untouched by change. There is a practice that gently brings you closer to this space. At a moment of stillness, observe how quickly the mind tries to define you. It may say, "This is who I am. This is what I want. This is what I lack. This is what I must become." Do not argue with it. Do not accept it. Simply notice it as movement. Then let your attention drift beneath it, not upward into thought, but downward into presence. There is no language here, only being.
There is a story of an old mask maker who was known for crafting expressions so precise that people believed they revealed true identity. Travelers would wear his masks, believing they would become more authentic versions of themselves. But over time, something strange was observed. Those who wore the masks began to forget their original faces. They became more attached to the mask than the wearer beneath it. One day, the mask maker stopped working. When asked why, he said, "I realized I was not revealing faces. I was replacing them." And so he began teaching something different, not how to wear identity, but how to rest beneath it. This is the essence of the silence between identity and becoming. You are not your current expression. You are not your past pattern. You are not your projected future. You are the awareness in which all of these appear and dissolve. As you begin to rest in this understanding, something subtle changes. The urgency to define yourself begins to soften. You become less concerned with maintaining a fixed narrative about who you are. And in that loosening, something surprising happens. You feel lighter.
Not because life becomes simpler externally, but because internal self-definition is no longer constantly active. There is also a shift in how you relate to change. Becoming no longer feels like pressure. It becomes a natural unfolding. You are not forcing yourself into a new version of identity. You are allowing identity itself to become fluid. This fluidity creates space for alignment, because what is rigid cannot receive new form without resistance, but what is spacious can reshape without collapse. There is another layer to this principle. When you stop over-identifying with who you are, you begin to notice what remains constant beneath all states. Whether you are calm or disturbed, confident or uncertain, active or still, there is something that remains unchanged. This is not personality. It is awareness itself. And awareness does not evolve. It observes evolution. This recognition brings a quiet stability. You are no longer entirely
dependent on the fluctuations of identity to feel real. You are anchored in something prior to identity. As this deepens, you may notice that external validation loses some of its influence, not because you reject it, but because you no longer rely on it to confirm existence. You begin to operate from inner recognition rather than external definition. There is also a subtle transformation in desire. Desire becomes less about becoming someone else and more about expressing what already feels aligned within you. This removes internal conflict because you are no longer chasing a future self that invalidates your present awareness. You are allowing presence itself to evolve naturally. There will still be moments when identity becomes loud again, when the mind insists on defining, comparing, or restricting. In those moments, you do not resist identity. You simply notice that it is appearing within awareness, and that awareness is not limited by it. This recognition alone creates space, and in space, identity loses rigidity. Over time, something remarkable happens. You begin to feel less like something trying to become, and more like something unfolding, not fixed, not incomplete, but continuously revealing itself without strain. This is not detachment from life. It is freedom within it.
This is the 23rd principle of silent abundance, that identity loses control when awareness rests beneath it, allowing becoming to unfold without resistance. So you remain in the silence beneath definition, not rejecting who you are, but no longer confined by it. And in that silence, becoming happens on its own accord.
There is a kind of action that does not feel like effort. It does not arise from pressure, urgency, or internal conflict. It does not require you to push against resistance within yourself. Instead, it emerges as if it was already waiting beneath awareness, complete in structure, quiet in presence, precise in direction. This is aligned action. Most action in life is reactive. It is triggered by emotion, shaped by fear, or driven by uncertainty. It moves quickly, but not always cleanly. It often creates more friction than flow because it is initiated from imbalance rather than clarity. But aligned action is different. It does not begin in tension. It begins in coherence. There is a hidden geometry to it, an inner order that naturally forms when silence, clarity, and inner stillness are present long enough to organize perception unify. You are not deciding what to do. You are recognizing what is already obvious when noise is removed. There is a practice that reveals this distinction. At a quiet moment, bring to mind something you feel called to act upon in your life. It does not matter whether it is small or large. What matters is your internal state as you observe it.
Now, notice the quality of energy behind it. Does it feel forced? Does it feel scattered? Does it feel emotionally charged or mentally complicated? Or does it feel simple, clean, almost self-evident? Do not analyze the answer. Feel it. Aligned action always carries a sense of simplicity, even when the task itself is complex. There is a story of a master craftsman who built structures that seemed impossibly precise. People assumed he worked through intense planning and calculation. But when asked about his process, he said something unexpected. "I do not decide what to build. I wait until the building reveals how it wants to exist." He would spend long periods in stillness before touching any material. And when he finally acted, his movements were few, deliberate, and final, without correction. To outsiders, it looked like sudden genius. But to him, it was recognition. This is how aligned action functions. It is not generated through effortful decision-making. It emerges when internal noise has quieted enough for clarity to become visible. As you begin to practice this awareness, something important shifts. You stop overacting. You stop over-explaining. You stop multiplying
unnecessary steps in your decisions. Instead, action becomes selective, precise, economical. There is another layer to this principle. When action is aligned, it does not drain you in the same way reactive action does. It actually preserves energy because it is not fighting internal resistance. Reactive action creates fragmentation. Part of you moves forward, part of you hesitates, part of you questions. But aligned action creates unity. The entire system moves together. This unity is what gives it its effortless quality. You may notice that aligned action often feels quiet before it feels visible. It does not demand urgency. It does not force emotional intensity. It simply becomes clear. And clarity is its own signal. There is also an important refinement here. Many people mistake hesitation for misalignment. But hesitation can also be noise clearing itself before clarity emerges.
The key is not speed. It is quality of inner state. Aligned action often arises after stillness, not during mental acceleration. As this understanding deepens, you begin to trust silence more than impulse. You stop reacting immediately to every internal suggestion. You allow space for coherence to form. And in that space, unnecessary actions naturally fall away. You begin to notice how much of what you once did was not truly required, and how much energy was being spent maintaining movement that was not aligned. As that energy is released, something subtle happens. Your capacity for sustained clarity increases. You are no longer scattered across too many directions. Your attention gathers. And from gathered attention, action becomes more powerful, even when it is minimal. There is also a shift in how outcomes unfold. Aligned action tends to require fewer corrections later. It carries an inherent stability because it originates from clarity rather than reaction. It does not need constant adjustment. It moves in a clean trajectory. There will still be moments when you act from impulse. This is part of the human experience. But over time, you begin to recognize the difference more quickly. And with recognition comes choice. Not forced discipline, but natural refinement. You begin to wait a little longer before acting. Not out of delay, but out of respect for clarity. And in that waiting, something important develops: precision. This is the hidden geometry, not visible structure in the outer world, but inner alignment
that organizes outward movement into coherence. This is the 24th principle of silent abundance. That action becomes powerful not through intensity, but through alignment with inner clarity that emerges in silence. So you move less from reaction and more from recognition. And in that recognition, even small actions begin to carry weight far beyond their size. There is something within you that weakens every time you expose it too early. Not because expression is wrong, but because not everything that forms within silence is ready for contact with distortion. Some things require containment before they can survive exposure. This is the discipline of unseen protection. Most people expose their inner states prematurely. They speak about intentions before they stabilize. They share emotional realizations before they settle. They reveal evolving visions before they have taken full internal shape. And in doing so, they unconsciously invite fragmentation into what is still forming. The ancient path understood this deeply. What is sacred in formation must be guarded by silence until it becomes unshakable. There is a practice that reflects this understanding. When something meaningful begins to form within you, a direction, a realization, a desire, a shift in identity, do not rush to externalize it. Instead, observe it as if it is a seed still underground. Not hidden, but protected. There is a difference. A hidden thing is forgotten. A protected thing is nurtured in silence. There is a story of a monastery that kept a single tree at its center. It was said to bloom only once every several years, producing a rare fragrance that could be felt throughout the valley. Visitors would ask the monks what they did to make it bloom so beautifully. They would expect rituals, ceremonies, interventions. But the monks would simply say, "We do nothing to it. We only protect the space."
We only protect the space around it. No unnecessary touching, no disruption, no premature interference. And so the tree grew in its own timing, untouched by distortion. This is how inner formation works. When you stop exposing it too early, it develops integrity. When you stop narrating it prematurely, it develops coherence. When you stop seeking external validation for it, it develops strength. There is a subtle habit that this discipline reveals: the impulse to announce what is not yet complete, to speak about becoming before being has stabilized, to share internal movement before it has taken form. This impulse is not inherently wrong, but it is often premature. And premature exposure disperses energy. You begin to notice this in yourself more clearly as awareness deepens, not with judgment, but with precision. And in that recognition, you begin to hold more within silence. Not secrecy, but protection. There is also a refinement in how you relate to others. You begin to understand that not every environment can hold what is forming within you without distortion. Some spaces amplify doubt. Some amplify confusion. Some unintentionally fragment what is still developing. So you become more selective, not in withdrawal, but in discernment. You protect what is delicate until it becomes stable enough to exist without interference. This protection is not fear-based. It is preservation of coherence. As this practice deepens, something changes within your inner field. Ideas last longer without collapsing. Intentions remain clearer without distortion. Emotional states stabilize more quickly because they are no longer constantly being exposed to external noise before they are complete. There is another layer to this principle,
Unseen protection also includes guarding your own attention. Not everything that appears in awareness deserves engagement. Some thoughts are simply passing disturbances. Some emotions are temporary waves. Some impulses are not signals, but noise. When you stop feeding everything immediately, your inner field becomes more stable. And stability allows true formation to continue uninterrupted. There will still be moments when you feel the urge to express what is forming. This is natural.
This is natural. But now you pause, not to suppress, but to assess its readiness. Is it complete enough to withstand interpretation? Or is it still fragile in formation? If it is fragile, you return it to silence. Not to hide it, but to let it mature. Over time, something profound happens. What you eventually express becomes more powerful. Because it is no longer fragmented, it carries coherence. It carries weight. It carries stability that was not interrupted during formation. There is also a shift in how others perceive your presence. You become less verbally reactive, less emotionally exposed, more grounded. Not because you are withholding, but because you are no longer dispersing unfinished inner states into the external world. This creates a natural sense of depth around you. Not created, but revealed through restraint. This is the 25th principle of silence.
This is the 25th principle of silent abundance, that what is protected in silence develops strength, while what is exposed prematurely loses coherence. So you learn the discipline of holding, not forever, but until readiness is complete. And in that holding, what is becoming within you gains the stability it needs to eventually enter the world without fragmentation.
There is a way of receiving that does not reach, does not ask, and does not pull. It is not passive in the sense of absence, but receptive in the sense of openness without condition. Nothing is forced toward it, yet everything aligned finds its way into it naturally. This is receiving without demand. Most people unknowingly turn desire into pressure. Even subtle longing carries a hidden insistence. It should come. It must come. It needs to come now. This inner demand distorts the field of reception, narrowing what can actually arrive. But true receptivity has no tension. It does not negotiate with reality. It does not project timelines onto unfolding. It simply remains open, without shaping what enters. There is a practice that reveals this state. Sit quietly and bring awareness to your inner sense of wanting. Do not try to remove it. Do not try to fulfill it. Simply observe its texture. Does it feel tight or open? Does it feel urgent or calm? Does it feel like reaching or resting? You are not judging it. You are listening to its quality. Then gently shift awareness beneath it, into the space where wanting is observed, not expressed. In that space, something changes. The pressure begins to soften. The need to define outcome begins to dissolve. And what remains is a quieter form of openness. There is a story of an old well keeper who maintained a deep water source in a dry region. Travelers often arrived desperate, asking how to make the well produce more water. The keeper would shake his head and say, "The well does not produce, it receives." Confused, they would ask, "Receives what?" He would answer, "Everything that is already on its way." They did not understand at first, but those who stayed long enough noticed something subtle. When the wind changed, moisture gathered. When silence settled over the land, condensation formed.
When conditions aligned, water appeared, not through force, but through readiness. The well did nothing. It only remained open. This is the essence of receiving without demand. You are not trying to extract outcomes from life. You are becoming a space where outcomes can naturally arrive when conditions align. As you begin to embody this, something important shifts in your inner experience. Desire becomes less strained. You still prefer certain outcomes. You still feel direction. But the emotional pressure around them decreases. There is no longer a sense of inner gripping. And in that release, clarity increases. There is another layer to this principle. Demand creates narrowing. It compresses possibility into a single expected form. But openness expands the field.
It allows life to arrive in ways that are not limited by your imagination. This is often where people miss what is meant for them. Not because it does not arrive, but because it does not arrive in the form they demanded. As you soften demand, perception becomes more flexible. You begin to recognize opportunities that do not match your original mental script, but do match your deeper alignment. There is also a subtle change in your emotional baseline. Less frustration when things are not immediate. Less agitation when outcomes are unclear. Less internal negotiation with timing. Instead, a quiet steadiness forms. Not indifference, but trust without tension. This trust is not belief. It is experience of reduced interference. You begin to see that forcing does not accelerate alignment. It only distorts it. And what is distorted must later be corrected, which creates delay disguised as action. So you begin to pause more often. Not to delay life, but to stop interfering with its natural unfolding. There will still be moments when demand arises. This is part of conditioned mind patterns. When it appears, you do not resist it. You simply notice, this is reaching. And then you return to openness. Each return restores spaciousness, and spaciousness is what allows true receiving. Over time, something subtle but profound begins to happen. You stop feeling like you are constantly trying to bring life toward you. Instead, you begin to sense that life moves toward you when you are not obstructing its arrival. There is less effort, less strain, more alignment. And the paradox becomes clear. What you stop demanding begins to approach more naturally. This is the 26th principle of silent abundance. That receiving is not the act of pulling life inward, but the removal of inner pressure that blocks what is already moving toward you. So you remain open, not demanding, not withdrawing, but allowing reality to meet you without resistance.
There is a state in which nothing needs to be pursued, yet everything begins to organize itself around you. It does not announce itself. It does not arrive with intensity. It does not require belief or effort. It simply emerges when your inner field stops broadcasting contradiction. This is the frequency of unseen alignment. Most people try to change their outer life while remaining internally fragmented. One part of them wants clarity. Another holds doubt. One part seeks abundance. Another rehearses lack. One part moves forward. Another constantly looks back. In this divided state, life responds in fragments. Because reality does not respond to desire alone. It responds to coherence. There is a practice that reveals this principle not as idea, but as lived experience. At a moment of quiet, bring awareness inward and observe the overall tone of your inner state. Not specific thoughts,
not specific emotions, but the background frequency beneath them. Is it scattered or unified? Is it tense or settled? Is it divided or whole? Do not attempt to correct it immediately. Simply observe. There is a story from an ancient tuning tradition where musicians believed that instruments did not create harmony. They revealed it. They would place instruments in a room and allow them to rest without being played. Over time, they noticed something subtle. Instruments tuned to the same frequency began to resonate with each other naturally, even without being touched. But those out of alignment created subtle dissonance in the space around them. One master tuner said, "You do not force harmony. You remove what prevents it from appearing." This is the essence of frequency alignment. You are not adding something new to your life. You are removing internal dissonance that prevents coherence from expressing itself outwardly. As you begin to notice your own frequency more clearly, something shifts. You become aware of how often your inner state fluctuates between contradictory signals: hope and doubt, clarity and confusion, trust and resistance. These fluctuations are not failures. They are noise patterns, and noise prevents alignment from stabilizing. There is another layer to this understanding. When your frequency is fragmented, even correct actions produce unstable results. But when your frequency is coherent, even small actions carry amplified effect. This is why alignment is more powerful than effort. Effort moves energy outward. Alignment organizes energy inward. And organized energy expresses itself naturally in the outer world. As you continue this practice, you may notice that certain environments, conversations, or mental inputs disrupt your coherence more than others. You begin to sense this not intellectually, but immediately. A feeling of contraction, a subtle disturbance, a loss of inner clarity. This awareness is not about avoidance. It is about discernment. You begin to protect your frequency, not through isolation, but through conscious engagement. You no longer allow everything to enter your field without awareness of its effect. There is also a refinement in your internal dialogue. Instead of multiple conflicting narratives, there begins to emerge a quieter single thread beneath thought, a sense of direction that does not argue with itself. This is the beginning of coherence stabilizing into identity. Not identity as personality, but identity as state. And state is frequency in motion. There will still be moments of dissonance. This is natural. The system is recalibrating. When it happens, you do not judge it. You simply notice. This is fragmentation, and you return inward. Not to force unity, but to allow it to reassemble itself naturally. Over time, something remarkable occurs. Your presence begins to feel more stable, not rigid, but consistent. You are less influenced by external fluctuations, less emotionally fragmented by circumstances, more centered within yourself, regardless of conditions. And from this center, life begins to respond differently. Opportunities feel more aligned. Timing feels more precise. Decisions feel less complicated. Not because the outer world has simplified, but because your inner frequency is no longer distorting perception. There is also a subtle shift in how manifestation unfolds. Instead of sudden effort followed by uncertainty, there is a gradual unfolding that feels almost inevitable. Not dramatic, but steady, as if reality is adjusting itself around a stabilized signal. This is the hidden principle. You do not attract what you want. You align with what matches your frequency. And frequency is not what you think. It is what you consistently are.
This is the 27th principle of silent.
The 7th principle of silent abundance. That life organizes itself around the coherence of your inner state, not the intensity of your desire. So you refine your frequency, not through force, but through quiet removal of inner contradiction. And in that refinement, alignment begins to happen without effort.
There is a point where effort stops feeling like movement forward and starts feeling like resistance against what is already unfolding. At that threshold, something important becomes visible. Much of what was once considered progress was actually strain against natural alignment. This is the dissolution of effortful becoming. Most people live in a continuous state of becoming someone else, better, more successful, more abundant, more aligned, more complete. And while growth is natural, effortful becoming carries a subtle tension, the assumption that what you are now is insufficient for what is meant to arrive. That assumption creates friction, and friction distorts flow. There is a deeper way of unfolding that does not depend on force. It is not the abandonment of action, but the removal of inner resistance from action. In this state, becoming is no longer a struggle toward identity. It is a relaxation into coherence. There is a practice that reveals this shift. At a quiet moment, observe your internal sense of self-improvement. Not its goals, but its pressure. Does it feel expansive or tight? Does it feel inspired or corrective? Does it feel like flow or like effort to escape something? Do not answer mentally. Feel it directly. There is a story from an ancient river tradition where students were trained to understand movement without resistance. They believed the river did not try to reach the ocean. It simply stopped resisting gravity. One teacher placed a leaf in flowing water and said, "The leaf does not become the river. It stops resisting the river." The students were confused. He continued, "You think becoming is effort, but becoming is what remains when resistance ends." This is the essence of effortless unfolding. You are not constructing a new self. You are removing interference from what is already forming. As you begin to recognize this, something subtle changes. Your inner urgency begins to soften. The constant pressure to become more loses its emotional grip. You begin to notice that many of your efforts were not directed by clarity, but by discomfort with stillness. And in stillness, something unexpected appears. Sufficiency. Not as achievement, but as recognition. There is a deeper layer here. Effortful becoming assumes distance between you and what you desire. But in silent alignment, that distance is not real. It is created by perception. When perception stabilizes, distance collapses. What you were trying to reach is no longer ahead. It is recognized as already forming within the same field you occupy. This recognition dissolves strain, not because goals disappear, but because separation decreases. There is also a shift in how you relate to time. Time is no longer a corridor you must run through. It becomes a medium in which unfolding reveals itself naturally. You stop pushing moments forward. You begin allowing them to arrive in their own completeness. And in that allowance, effort reduces without loss of effectiveness. There will still be action, but it will feel different. Less like pushing, more like participating. Less like forcing outcomes, more like moving with what is already in motion. This is the subtle turning point. When action is no longer fueled by internal resistance, it becomes clean, precise, unburdened, and often more effective than effort-driven striving. As this understanding deepens, you may notice that certain ambitions lose their emotional weight.
Not because you no longer care, but because you no longer need to struggle to validate them. There is a quiet confidence forming within you. Not arrogance, not certainty based on outcome, but trust in unfolding without resistance. And from that trust, something stabilizes. You begin to feel less fragmented between where you are and where you are going, because the gap between the two begins to dissolve.
There is also a refinement in self-perception. You stop measuring yourself against an imagined future version, and instead, you recognize continuity within your present becoming. Not a leap, but a flow. Not a replacement, but a revealing. This is the dissolution, not of ambition, but of struggle as its foundation. There will be moments when effort returns. Old conditioning is persistent, but now you recognize it more quickly. You feel when effort is aligned and when it is compensating for internal resistance. And with that recognition, you gain choice to continue forcing or to return to coherence. Over time, more of your life shifts toward coherence, not through elimination of action, but through removal of unnecessary strain within action. This is the 28th principle of silent abundance, that becoming does not require effort when resistance to what already is dissolves. So you move less against life and more with it. And in that movement, unfolding becomes natural again.
There is a point where seeking ends, not because desire disappears, but because the seeker within you becomes quiet. At that threshold, something subtle is revealed. Abundance was never something you were moving toward. It was something you had been moving within all along, distorted only by perception of separation. This is the return to natural abundance. Most people experience abundance as an external condition, something that must be achieved, accumulated, or secured. But in its original state, abundance is not an outcome. It is a natural expression of coherence within life itself. When inner fragmentation dissolves, abundance is no longer pursued. It is recognized. There is a practice that brings this recognition into direct experience. At a moment of stillness, let go of all internal measurement. Do not evaluate what you have or what you lack. Do not compare present conditions with imagined ones. Instead, simply observe what already exists, without interpretation. Not as enough or not enough, but as what is. There is a story from an ancient desert community where travelers believed they lived in scarcity. Water was rare, resources were limited, and survival required careful management. But the elders saw something different. They did not see scarcity.
They saw misalignment with rhythm. One elder said, "The land does not withhold. It responds to disturbance." Those who constantly acted from fear of lack found only more tension in their experience. But those who slowed down, who listened to timing, who ceased frantic effort, began to find that resources appeared in ways they had not previously noticed. Not because the land changed, but because perception became clear enough to recognize what was already present. This is natural abundance. It is not created. It is uncovered. As you begin to integrate this understanding, something shifts in your relationship with life. You stop interpreting pauses as absence. You stop interpreting delay as lack. You stop interpreting simplicity as insufficiency. Instead, you begin to see that abundance expresses itself in many forms. Not all of them dramatic, not all of them immediate, but all of them present when perception is uncluttered. There is another layer to this realization. When the internal sense of lack dissolves, external grasping also weakens. You no longer feel compelled to chase experiences to validate inner emptiness. And in that absence of grasping,
something unexpected occurs. Experience begins to deepen on its own. Simple moments feel more complete. Ordinary things feel more present. Life feels less like something to obtain and more like something to participate in. This is not a change in the world. It is a change in the filter through which the world is experienced.
They saw misalignment with rhythm. One elder said, "The land does not withhold. It responds to disturbance." Those who constantly acted from fear of lack found only more tension in their experience. But those who slowed down, who listened to timing, who ceased frantic effort, began to find that resources appeared in ways they had not previously noticed. Not because the land changed, but because perception became clear enough to recognize what was already present. This is natural abundance. It is not created. It is uncovered. As you begin to integrate this understanding, something shifts in your relationship with life. You stop interpreting pauses as absence. You stop interpreting delay as lack. You stop interpreting simplicity as insufficiency. Instead, you begin to see that abundance expresses itself in many forms. Not all of them dramatic, not all of them immediate, but all of them present when perception is uncluttered. There is another layer to this realization. When the internal sense of lack dissolves, external grasping also weakens. You no longer feel compelled to chase experiences to validate inner emptiness. And in that absence of grasping, something unexpected occurs. Experience begins to deepen on its own. Simple moments feel more complete. Ordinary things feel more present. Life feels less like something to obtain and more like something to participate in. This is not a change in the world. It is a change in the filter through which the world is experienced.
There is also a shift in emotional dependence. You are no longer emotionally anchored to outcomes in the same way. Success does not inflate you. Delay does not collapse you. Instead, there is a steadier center forming within you that is less reactive to external variation. This center is not detached from life. It is embedded within it, but not controlled by it. As this deepens, you begin to notice that what you once called abundance was often mixed with tension, effort to maintain, fear of loss, anticipation of change. But natural abundance carries no such tension. It is stable, even when conditions fluctuate. There will still be movement in life, expansion and contraction, gain and release. But your internal state becomes less dependent on these cycles. You begin to recognize that abundance is not what enters or leaves your life. It is what remains constant beneath both. And that constant is awareness in alignment. There is a quiet freedom that arises here. You stop negotiating with life. You stop trying to secure outcomes through internal strain. You begin to trust unfolding without interference. And from that trust, life begins to feel less like something you must manage and more like something you are already within. Not outside of it, not pursuing it, but part of its natural rhythm. This is the return, not to something new, but to something always present beneath distortion. This is the 29th principle of silent abundance.
The 9th principle of silent abundance? That abundance is not acquired through effort, but revealed when perception returns to its natural state of clarity. So you no longer chase abundance, you uncover it. And in that uncovering, life becomes simpler, steadier, and more quietly complete.
There comes a moment in every journey where continuation is no longer about seeking, but about integration. Not more knowledge, not more practice, not more becoming, only the quiet settling of what has already been understood. This is the closing of the silent covenant. Throughout this path, nothing new was truly given to you. Only what was already present beneath noise was gently uncovered, layer by layer, silence by silence, return by return. Now, there is no further instruction to add, only a final remembrance to embody. You are not separate from the abundance you once sought. You are not outside the field you were trying to enter. You are not waiting for alignment. You are the space in which alignment happens. At this final threshold, let everything you have carried through these teachings begin to soften, not as forgetting, but as release of effort to hold. There is a final practice, not as technique,
but as return. Sit in stillness. Do not visualize. Do not affirm. Do not seek to maintain anything. Allow even the teachings themselves to become quiet within you. Let thoughts slow. Let identity loosen. Let expectation dissolve. And remain only as awareness, simple, unconstructed, present. In this simplicity, there is no striving left, no direction to chase, no inner negotiation to continue, only being. There is a story from an ancient tradition of silent keepers who guarded no treasure, no doctrine, no object of power. When travelers asked what they protected so carefully, they would lead them into an empty chamber. No artifacts, no inscriptions, no symbols, only stillness. Confused, many would leave disappointed, believing there was nothing there. But a few would remain long enough to notice something subtle. In that emptiness, they began to feel themselves, without distortion, without urgency, without fragmentation. And in that recognition, they understood. Nothing was missing. Nothing was withheld. Nothing was needed. The keeper would simply say, "What you were searching for was never stored here. It was the absence of what obscured it."
This is the final understanding of silent abundance. It was never about acquiring more. It was about removing what prevented you from recognizing what already is. So as this path closes, nothing is taken from you. Only interference is released. You return to ordinary life, but not as you were before. Not because you have become something new, but because the noise that once shaped perception has lessened. And in that lessening, clarity remains. You may still act, you may still desire, you may still engage with the world, but something within you will no longer fully leave itself in doing so. A part of you remains unmoved, unshaken, undisturbed.
This is the silent center you now carry, not as possession, but as recognition. And in that center, abundance is no longer something arriving. It is something continuously perceived, not as event, but as presence. Now, nothing more is required from this teaching. No continuation, no expansion, only embodiment. Return to your life, not as seeker, but as awareness within movement. Not as one who pursues silence, but as one who recognizes it within all things. And in that recognition, the covenant is complete. The silence remains, and it was never elsewhere. It was always here.